about Grassland conservation now.
Norman Argulin with Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities.
Harry Stocky, rancher.
Come on in, we're just waiting for you to introduce yourself.
Brooks Smitty.
Well, thanks everybody for showing up, both producers and the individuals from various agencies, organizations, governments. Great to have you all here on a beautiful day. Larry is going to collect any resolutions that may be prepared for today. So you can, if you have anything, talk to Larry here. And we'll get right into we have a series of presentations, and we'll begin with Mike Schellenberg with the Living Labs Central Prairie. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Right here would be perfect.
Right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. I'll be talking on the Living Life Central Prairies project, Sodcap, actually put in under a different title. We won't talk about how long it took us to take and negotiate this title compared to what the federal government was suggesting we call ourselves. There's something about World War II connotation with the title they had provided. So, shall we start here? Okay. Without our supporters, this project probably would not have gone forward. The project had a lot of supporters. From this slide, you can see we have a strong representation of the livestock industry as well as the agricultural industry itself, as well as conservation groups. We also have some more conservation groups, Agriculture Canada, and we also have a number of universities on there as well. They all came together, provided support in various manner, cash and letters of support, as well as individuals. And they were key, in my mind, to moving this forward, because the Living Labs requires a very strong network to take and be successful. The Living Labs Initiative is a new approach to ag innovation. It brings together the farmers, scientists, and collaborators to take and develop beneficial management practices. To note, I will stumble a number of times on the word beneficial because I'm used to the previous name, best management practices, but beneficial is now the new term. But like I said, I stumble because I spent 35 years with Ag Canada, and we always use best management. So we're into beneficial, new phase one. And it's basically to address agri-environmental issues. That's key here. It's not necessarily production oriented, but it's more ag environmental. Or in my mind, that means working landscapes. The expected results are to mitigate and adapt to climate change, reduce water contamination, improve soil and water conservation, and maximize habitat capacity and biodiversity in agricultural landscapes. That's a pretty tall order, which I think we managed to accomplish to some extent. Living Labs' core principles are its user-centered innovation. That means the producers have to come forward with what they want to see done on their land that they see as a benefit to the environment. That means working in partnership with the producers as well as the researchers. These researchers will be key in actually collecting some of that data to take and identify the benefits. And it also has to be real life in context. So again, it's in those working fields that the data needs to be collected. It's in an innovation cycle. So every year there is an expectation that there will be some development or modification of what's going on in the field with the producers and the researchers. There's conversations. There will be experimentation so they can identify what's happening and how that goes forward. Then there'll be an evaluation, and then within that evaluation, we then go into making the adjustments for the next year. This goes on every year. It's a requirement that every year it occurs. So, an overview of what we put forward. So, who is the Living Labs Central Prairies? Well, it's Sodcap, this organization, as well as Agriculture Canada is helping with some of the research, producers, additional researchers, and industry partners themselves. And it's occurring on the lands in Saskatchewan. There are a few sites in Alberta, but we go from the brown, dark brown to the black soil zone. So we basically have agreed across the province that we're looking at. And why? Well, of course, there's the wind. The wind is 22 to 27. Unfortunately, due to some of the lagging on the agreements, we probably will only have data starting collecting in 23. But 22 is very much about pulling things together. And why are we doing this? This is to advance development and uptake of locally appropriate management practices that combat climate change. And what are we doing? We're working together to identify and implement effective strategies for sequestering carbon, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, while maintaining other ecosystem goods and services. So it's not just carbon and the greenhouse gas. There is an element there where we're actually looking at those ecosystem goods and services. So the overarching elements that we will be looking at include carbon measurements, soil health, biodiversity. There is a production, economic viability, and social acceptance. We have a strong team, probably one of the strongest teams of the 13 Living Labs for looking at the socioeconomic aspects, not just the economics, but also why people are interested in doing the management systems, as well as the public at large. So what we did is we went out and approached the producers as to what they wanted to see, what they felt would be a benefit. I will say that this project is very much oriented to perennial ground cover. There is some elements of annual, but it is very much perennial. So what we came up with are the following: avoidance of land use conversion. We felt that there is a lack of recognition of the carbon that is within those perennial grasslands that we have in the Southwest and across Saskatchewan as a whole. So we're definitely going to look at some how to avoid that land conversion so that we maintain the carbon that's already there, as opposed to trying to rebuild carbon. And then we have adaptive management, where we're looking at manipulation, location, timing, intensity, and duration of grazing and rest periods. This portion is actually already ongoing with some of the projects within Sodcap, but we're adding in the carbon and the greenhouse gas element that has not been there previously. And we're also looking at grazing of stockpile forage, supplementation of grazing animals with protein and minerals, and how that might benefit the carbon stores themselves. And we also have, not surprising, restoration of those perennial grasslands. We're not talking, and when people say restoration, they tend to focus on marginal lands, but we're also looking at what would be considered non-marginal lands and how to take and put those back into perennial cover. And the benefits of doing that, we're also looking at doing some rejuvenation, such as introducing legumes into existing stands to increase productivity and therefore the carbon themselves. And then we have grazing of diverse annual cover crops. I prefer the word polycrops because you're using more than just one crop on the land, and we're looking at blends of annual species. But you should have, hopefully, it's sort of tweaked your mind at the moment, is we're looking at interfaces. We're looking at the soil, plant, and animal interface. So we're trying to take and provide information how that all those three phases work together to take and benefit the environment, increase carbon, and decrease greenhouse gas emissions. So here's a map, and as I said, we have locations from the semi-arid all the way up to the moist black zones for all three areas where we're looking at restoration, grazing, and then the annual crops. At this point in time, Tom at the back of the room is the better expert, but I believe we have at least 25 producers that have expressed interest in various elements of the project. So the research areas are quite extensive, which is why we have 52 researchers on board looking at various elements. So we're looking at the soils, like the organic carbon, greenhouse gas emissions, nutrient cycling, moisture, and microbial community. Microbial community is something fairly new. It's becoming an area of strong interest. And then we have the plants themselves, of course, the biomass for carbon, plant community performance. We're looking at yield, forage quality, things of that nature, and then the community ecology itself, how those plants work together. This is going to be key to take and mitigate some of the climate change, the changing environment that we're going to be working in the next decades to come. Also looking at the livestock, where we have enteric, excuse me, enteric methane emissions, grazing animal performance, and we're also looking at the whole system, the ecosystem itself, with greenhouse gas fluxes, water fluxes and storage, and biodiversity. Again, the biodiversity is not necessarily those megafauna such as birds, but we're also looking at the invertebrates and the slow microbial component, as well as insects. And then we have the whole farm, ranch, and communities. This is where our social, economic, our social science people come in, where we'll be doing a number of surveys, et cetera, to take it, tease out why people like, dislike, why they're accepting, why they're interested in certain management practices, et cetera.
Mike, can I interrupt for a minute? I just wondered the word flux there, I'm not understanding.
But basically, when you, with fluxes, especially with greenhouse gases, during the growing season, you have your greenhouse gases will gas off at certain times of the years, and other times they'll be absorbed. So you get this flux, basic up and down cycle. And the idea here is to try and identify, are we having an increase in methane, or methane, for example, overall, although because there will, depending on when you go sample, you'll have decreases and increases. So we need that sort of full scale to understand what that flux is up. Okay, and same thing with the water. You have periods where hopefully in spring we actually see water, and then we have our dry Septembers where we see no water. So they're again a different example.
I have a quick question for you as well.
Yeah.
In your previous slide, you said that you were looking for producers. Have you guys looked into like a place like Illinois where there's crop ryegrass? We've been trying to get them to do something with taking it over. You guys do any work with federal land?
No, so we had to find non-government land.
I'm just curious because I thought that one little spot looked like it was maybe the park.
Yeah, there's areas just outside of that park that are privately managed.
Another blessing of being one place.
Yeah, we were approached by I believe it's is it Last Mountain Lake? Where's the other bioreserve up at?
There's Last Mountain Lake. There's one, the
Yeah.
Bird Sanctuary up there with
Yeah.
Environment Canada.
No, it's ECCC runs a protected area similar to yours there, and we were approached there, and we had a little back and forth on that, and they were trying to not be on federal property. The whole idea is privately managed, privately owned as much as possible, right? So that's one
deeded land, basically.
Deeded or privately managed. So your provincial lease, your private lease would work. Yeah, that's too bad. But that's kind of the boundaries of the.
I just thought your mission and their mission would be because they're not.
So would there be any funding available for like groups like that? Like it would,
For your guys' group or like for which group?
well, for the government, federally owned pasture.
No, and I can kind of, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but they won't step on each other's toes.
Yeah.
Like any provincial program that's available, we can't access because it's federal. Like,
Yeah, so
because they won't, like I said, they won't step on each
It's
other's toes.
federally owned, but locally managed.
Yeah, no, I know. So,
The current concern often comes down to where the money flows and flows from. Even within this project, we've had to be very careful as to where funds are coming from so that there isn't, the optics don't allow for double dipping, to put it simply. And they become very, very touchy in those regards.
And this is something that the federal government has showed interest in, but typical federal government, you will never see it done, where I thought, yeah, you guys could.
That being said, the whole initiative was trying to get across brown, dark brown and black soil zones, and hopefully we get across some eco sites that are really similar to that are in your pasture there, and you'll have something to compare against, so you have an idea of what kind of carbon potential you have.
That is one of the key things. It is as this goes forward, when we're identifying the benefits, it is that the producers themselves will be able to take and see those benefits. It will be part of the KTT approach will be to take and have tours on various sites. So there will be that free exchange of information.
Well, I thought it would be easier for you guys than to go looking for ground. Well, there
Yeah. Federal land was very touchy. Let's put that.
it is. Okay, I'll stay every time.
So the Living Labs iterative process is basically we have to engage the partners being very much the producers and the researchers. There has to be an exchange of information back and forth within, basically, as we've already discussed, the land. I will say we did get granted an exception for some of the measurements they are being done on the federal research land because the measurements are very intensive. But other than that, that took a special permission from Ottawa. So we need to implement and coordinate planning and logistics. That's definitely where we are at this point in time, is trying to take and pull things together so that we can do this in the most efficient way, looking for ways to create synergies. And we definitely need to take and connect with the users themselves, producers, and to some extent the consumers as well, so they understand the value of what is on the land. So we have a core team made up of Sodcap individuals, such as Kelly Williamson, who's the general manager. I'm the science lead at this point in time. Knowledge and tech transfer engagement lead is Tom Harrison, sitting at the back, trying to hide, I think. Slowly sliding over in the seat. And then Adrian Tostad is our coordinator. And then we have the Ag Canada component. And with this project, we had to have an Ag Canada component. They were actually appointed for us. So we have Dr. Akhtar out of Indian Head and Dr. Alamu out of Swift Current. And then we have the coordinators, Kim Hodge. You may know him from the old days of PFRA. So this chart is an attempt to take and give you the idea that everything is interconnected. There's free exchange across all items on this chart itself. We have our core team, which is looking, sort of has the input into our indigenous partners, and the indigenous partners having an interest in medicinal plants and the impact that grazing has and potential carbon sequestration. Then we also have the producers who are coming forward to take and provide sites, and as well as ideas as to what they want for beneficial management practices, which we've already seen. And then within the researches, we've also taken and divided them into groups. Like I said, there were 52, so we needed some way of organizing them. So when we have a meeting, we don't bring in all 52. We actually talk about specific components, such as the carbon quantification, greenhouse gas measurement and modeling. And then we have the social ecological assessment group, which we divided into social science. And then we also have the biophysical. And again, as I said, some of that is already ongoing under Sodcap with other projects. And then we have a steering committee. So that's the top priority right now, is developing those protocols and formulating how we're going to go out into the field. The secondary priority is going to be creating these better beneficial management practice working groups where we'll have these open discussions with producers and researchers involved in these within these groups. According to the BMPs that we have identified, this is a secondary priority, and this will be coming forward this fall, later this fall, specifically, where we're getting together to take and start that. And what comes out of these working groups will then be communicated to the researchers, and adjustments will be made as to what we might, as in what parameter that we do we miss that we might be should be measuring or might be measuring that would maybe help explain some of the benefits better, or vice versa. So knowledge and technology, KTT, knowledge and technology transfer team. Our chairs are Tom Harrison and Kerry LaForge from Canada. And their job really is to take and develop those communication packages. Be they newsletters, webinars, and also, and actually Sodcap has already been quite active. If you go onto the Sodcap website, you'll find that there is actually a page there for the Living Labs, I believe.
Soon to be a page.
Oh, soon to be.
Don't go this week.
Okay, I'm wrong. I thought I looked at it. Oh, well. The audience, as I've already said, is very much the general public, the producers themselves, researchers and students. The general public is important because, as has been identified, we're working with governments. The governments are very much directed by the general public. Not just the producers, but the general public as full. So if we can bring the general public on side with understanding what is going on, that would be a huge help in forwarding the message that we're trying to forward and the positives. So the key reporting requirements for this Living Labs is as very much was emphasized when developing the proposal, is that carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas mitigation. And that has to be reported. The improvements or non-improvements has to be reported every year. So it's key that we get those measurements occurring. And we also need to be sharing information to populate the database for the national inventory to some extent. The numbers that are gained get plugged into a model which will be used. The socioeconomic analysis, as I've said before, is going to be ongoing. This will provide some of that economic information that producers like to see. Is this management going to cost me? And if it does cost me, how much? Or am I going to make more of a profit? How is this going to affect my yield? That will come out of that analysis. And then the knowledge transfer success or reasons for slow uptake will also occur. And again, we have individuals that will be doing surveys to take and determine how well we're doing with that message. So where are we in the process? At this point, the science teams have been brought together. They are already talking. They've developing protocols. So we have some synergies occurring. One of the key things that we're trying to avoid here is having 52 researchers show up on everybody's land at the same time. Surely we can take and package some of the sampling, et cetera, in such a way that we can narrow it down quite a bit and don't overwhelm our producer partners. The KTT committee has been formed. Topic discussions are being planned. One of the first ones might be the polycrops, which we're sort of shooting for the end of October to try and start getting a better idea exactly what it is that producers want to see. Right now, it's very much a shotgun approach on ideas. We're trying to get that narrowed to something that we can actually do or work with. Field sampling has been discussed, but is on hold pending agreements. In fact, it's everything at this point in time is pending agreements. Deadlines have been missed. We've been promised new deadlines. We'll see what happens. Again, the funding we have gotten at this point, no funding at this point. We're waiting for the funding to come. So, in conclusion then, the project will examine producer-selected BMPs for carbon contributions, greenhouse gas mitigation, socioeconomic benefits, uptake, and biodiversity. Fairly tall order. But the interesting thing, in 35 years of my career, this is probably one of the very few times where we're actually allowed to take it, are being given money to take a look at perennial cover and forages and their contribution. Most of the money in the past has always gone to annual crops. This is one of the few times we're actually being given money to take a look at that perennial cover. And this will be an iterative process involving producers, researchers, and knowledge transfer. And that's all I have. Other questions, comments? Yes.
Do you feel that you'll have an accurate way of measuring carbon sequestration by soil types?
Well, one of the reasons we have soil scientists on board, they say that we will be able to do that. Problem with having the sites across the soil zones is the different climatic. Like black soils will have more moisture, so therefore we already know they'll have more carbon. We'll have numbers that we can compare across those. We know that, hopefully there will be BMPs that work better in the drier areas and versus the black and vice versa. So what we have is a gradient that will provide us information as to. Okay.
So does the water actually help absorb more carbon? Is that what you said by the black versus the gray or the?
No, what you have is moisture. It causes typically, as we look out the window, we see that lack of moisture doesn't really promote growth. So with moisture, you get promoted growth, more carbon.
Any other questions for Mike?
Just half the front end is creating the carbon methodology and standardizing protocols, Randy. And so it is a little bit of back and forth with the U of A. They'd like to go to a full meter. Some of the AFC folks previously had only been going to like 30 centimeters. And so we're hoping to come or arrive at something that we feel that is capturing the carbon potentials of perennial grassland. And
I guess the reason is if there is any economic value there for producers down the road, we have to be able to measure it.
Yeah. And to the full extent, right?
With your perennials, your root systems go much deeper than you would in an annual. The annuals, you can get away with that shallower depth because the active growing area is very within that 30 centimeters. Whereas your perennials, you have living roots. And by the way, I had many heated discussions with a well-known Order of Canada soil scientist about the fact that he insisted that perennials, the roots all died every year.
Well, how's it come back then?
That's the way he did his carbon calculations. As far as he was concerned, all roots die every year because that's what in the plant he studied was wheat. That's what happened with wheat.
You should have a talk with the Canadian thistle.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's another reason why you want that greater depth. It is so you can establish, how far down the carbon. And if you're looking at studies in the States with shrubs, I did a lot of work with shrubs, and it's those greater depths is where you're getting the carbon benefits out of these perennials, especially your shrubs. for instance, and a lot of your forests go down quite deep as well.
I see you had a site in Alberta. Is that part of your
Our work?
research project then?
No, I believe that's the Silver Sage site. There's also the Matthews Ranch that the U of A has. They got a bunch of grazing research going on there. So we'll probably piggyback and grab some of that data.
In Alberta, not the other living lab?
They got 3. Saskatchewan got 2. The other site is at Mistawassa's, up like Blaine Lake, north of Blaine Lake. And down the road, I mean, they've got some approaches that differ a little bit from us, but there will be probably synergies and overlap, and we'll definitely try to reach out to that living lab and identify opportunities to share knowledge and make sure that they've got a few more cropping things going on there, but we use our extension and knowledge transfer outlets to make sure all the information is getting out there. But Alberta got 2, 3. There's one in that Peace River. It's kind of Alberta, BC, and then Alberta Beef Producers got one, and then the Alberta Conservation Association got one, and they are partnered with like Water Wellness and another entity there. So I believe at that Silver Sage site in Alberta, there will be maybe some of our scientists collecting some information there, or getting some information from the Alberta side, because I think both of us want to look at that site. They've got some native plant restoration going on there long term, and it'd be good to understand the effects of it.
You're looking at a chronology of basically different age stands. You get an idea of how fast that carbon might have been accumulated under the various stands.
Yeah,
I just thought it'd be good because it would be similar to here, this area, because it looks to me like the one closer to the park, that's going to be different from here.
oh yeah, for sure. We've got 25 sites. It can be rounded out a little bit. I've been back and forth with Tom. I'm always phoning Tom saying, I've got another person for you, I got another person for you. I think we're gonna put one in the Sandhills. There is another initiative that we're tightly linked with, and that's the strategic research initiative that the province has got going on. And they are doing a bunch of carbon sampling. And so we might not be able to come down here to your pasture to do the full suite of measurements that we're doing on all these other living labs. But I could probably direct the carbon sampling team through that strategic research initiative down to your pasture if you want, if you're interested in that. So they just come down and do a bunch of carbon sampling.
Okay, well, are you able to stay with us for the afternoon, Mike?
I'm here until 4 o'clock. I'll let you do your business.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and we will have a coffee break. It may not be as long as anticipated because I was late getting the meeting started here, but thank you, Mike. Looking against those windows down there, but I think Shay Anderson, another board member, youth member for Sodcap, and it looks like his daughter's there with him as well. Thank you for joining us. So our next speaker is Leanne Heisler from Sask Environment, and her latest project, she's been around a long time, working on various files, but on pronghorn management. Thank you for joining us, Leanne.
Cool. Yeah, and thank you for having me. I've been working as the pronghorn manager for about a year and some now, and it's really great to get out and talk to you guys about what you're seeing on the landscape so I can set those license allocations better. So yeah, just going to talk a little bit about pronghorn, a little bit about their biology. So pronghorn are a fairly unique species in North America. They're not as closely related to deer, elk, or moose as we'd like to think. They are, and they've evolved a little bit differently on the landscape. So they prefer those like open grasslands where the tallest thing that obstructs their sight is the sort of mid-sized shrubs like sagebrush. And that's, they prefer those landscapes because they can see, they can detect and get away from predators a lot better in those landscapes. So they have pretty sharp eyesight. It's kind of like looking through a pair of binoculars. They can see pretty far away, so they can detect predators that are a fair distance away. And then the way that they've evolved to avoid predators is to just run really fast in a straight line, just to like get out of there. So they can run up to 60 miles an hour, which is pretty quick. Yeah, those are the two main things that they use to detect and avoid predators, which is pretty impressive. But they're a fairly small bodied species, and because they've evolved to run rather than jump, they have a hard time navigating vertical structures like fences. So that kind of limits, now that we have quite a few fences on the landscape, that limits their ability to navigate the landscape, which I will get into just a little bit down the road here. So pronghorn are, they're considered a symbol of grassland conservation. They're a fairly, people seem to like pronghorn a lot. They're fairly unique looking, and those special adaptations make them a pretty likable species. But they have gone through some like ups and downs since we've settled the area. So before settlement, there were about 30 to 40 million pronghorn in North America. But due to overharvest, habitat loss, and habitat degradation, their populations really dropped down to small fragmented areas by the early 19th century. And then in Saskatchewan in particular, we were down to about 1,500 pronghorn by 1913. So we saw a pretty drastic decline up here. But through several conservation efforts like hunting closures, lots of effort from the ranching community, and then we also established some protected areas, we were able to recover those populations in the province. So now we're at a level where we can offer limited hunting opportunities, and we've gotten up to about 20,000 pronghorn. I think that's what we saw this year in our ground surveys. So now pronghorn, because they've kind of gone through that dip, we do have to wait a long time to get a license. About 15 years now is sort of the wait time for pronghorn, but they're a highly sought after game species. So when we offer those licenses, so for a deer license, we usually get 2 applications per deer license, and then it's about 4 applications for moose or elk, and then pronghorn are at 8. So we get a lot of people interested in hunting pronghorn in the province. Another unique thing about pronghorn is they're constantly on the move. So they're a very migratory species. They migrate more than most of our other big game species. They do seasonal movements both inside and outside the province. And they're really tied to what's going on the landscape. So because they run really fast, they have to keep their body weight down. So they don't carry a lot of body fat, which means that they really have to move around to find that forage that they need to just keep surviving on the landscape and keep reproducing. So they do spring and fall migrations, which are pretty regular. There are some herds that are more resident, so you'll see them hanging out in the same place. But the majority of our pronghorn, they do kind of move during the fall and the spring. And that's to just follow that grass forage, the good quality forage. So in the fall, we typically see them just kind of like moving around in somewhat random directions, like they're more exploring and looking for that good quality forage. So in a year like this, where it's really droughty, we're probably going to see them moving around like quite a bit. And then in the spring, they're moving to find that green up wherever that's going to happen. So those spring and fall migrations are fairly consistent for a lot of pronghorn, and they're sort of moving in and out of the province. So we do get the herds that are north of the Trans-Canada tend to move in and out of Alberta and Saskatchewan. They kind of move back and forth. And then the ones that are south of the Trans-Canada tend to move across the United States border into Montana and North Dakota. So there's two kind of distinct migration patterns there, but they happen in the spring and the fall. And then in the winter, they tend to settle in areas where there's enough evergreen forage for them to kind of get through the winter before they start moving in the spring. But there's also some like partial migrations that we see. So a couple years ago, we had a pretty hard winter in the Sandhills and just north of there. There was quite a bit of snow. There was like lots of deep snow. It had frozen, it had thawed out multiple times. So we had layers of ice. And that made it hard for pronghorn to move through the snow as well as find good forage. So we saw what we think is a partial migration out of there. So pronghorn they just tried to get out of the area as fast as they could. We did see some die-offs though. So pronghorn, they'll do their spring and fall migrations, but they'll also do those like partial migrations to get out of bad weather or bad habitat conditions. So that migration is a really important adaptation for pronghorn. It lets them move around and find that forage and find that cover and kind of survive those severe winters and things like that. So the steps that we take to manage pronghorn, the primary tool that we use is the hunting season, the big game draw. This is a fairly iconic species, but it occurs somewhat in low densities, although you wouldn't really think that this year because there's quite a few of them out there. But they're also sensitive to overharvest and those harsh winters. So when you get those two things together, you can see like a pretty drastic population decline, which we've seen a couple times, which have resulted in season closures. So we do have to try and keep track of that stuff and then just really be sensitive about how many licenses we offer each year. So with that in mind, we have a limited tag allocation because between 2011 and 13, we did see a big drop in pronghorn. There was a lot of snow that fell in Montana, and a lot of our pronghorn were moving down there and they got caught in that. So we lost like quite a few herds that way. So because of that, we had to close the seasons. And so everybody who's been going through the draw since then, they pretty much have to be a legacy pool to get drawn. We're starting to see that kind of turn over, but it's, yeah, most people are waiting 10 to 15 years to get their license. So it's quite a long wait for folks. And that migration that I was talking about earlier, that just makes it a little bit more difficult to set those licenses in different areas. Like for most species like deer and moose, we set them by wildlife management zones, which are smaller parcels. We kind of split up the egg zone into those little parcels. But pronghorn, because they move so much over the year, we don't want to be setting licenses in one zone and then have all the pronghorn move out of there. And then people who are being drawn in that zone don't have the opportunity. So we have to offer licenses over a much bigger area in order to give people that opportunity to actually find a pronghorn when they get drawn. So, because it would really not be great if you waited like 10 years to get your license and then you couldn't find any pronghorn. That would suck. So yeah, we do have a pronghorn draw. It's an either sex license that's offered every year. You can do archery, muzzle loader, crossbow, and rifle. So yeah, that's our primary tool for managing species. But we also work with other research. We do collaborate with other researchers, particularly to look at that migration, trying to mitigate vehicle collisions and navigate those fences a little better on the landscape. So one of the research collaborations that we have going on is pronghorn crossing, and that's out of the Mustakas Institute and the Alberta Conservation Association. So what they're doing is they're trying to identify areas along the Trans-Canada Highway where if we put in some infrastructure to help pronghorn move across the highway, it'll improve migration between the north and south. And we're also trying to reduce vehicle collisions with that. And also trying trying to with that program. The interesting where the Pronghorn corridors occur across the highway don't always line up with where we get the most vehicle collisions for Pronghorn. And because vehicle collisions are more often associated with some characteristics of how the road was built, rather than how many Pronghorn are actually moving across that highway. So we're trying to figure out where we can get the most bang for our buck, trying to find those corridors that Pronghorn are using to get across, but also the corridors where they're also lining up where we're finding a lot of vehicle collisions. So to do that, Pronghorn Crossing developed an app that people could use to send us information on where they're seeing pronghorn, both alive and dead. A little morbid, but yeah, and we use that information to find those corridors along with some collar data. So we did throw some collars on some pronghorn and followed them around to see where they're actually crossing. And then we use the app data to look at vehicle collisions, as well as some data that we got from SGI. And we identified a few spots along the Trans-Canada that we're hoping to improve the infrastructure there so that pronghorn can move across more efficiently without causing a lot of vehicle collisions. So we've got 2 spots in Alberta, but the 2 spots that we've identified in Saskatchewan are this Maple Creek area and then over by Tompkins. So those are the 2 spots that we're looking at. So right now we're kind of in the planning stage. We're going to go out next year with highway engineers and have a look at those spots and see if there's any existing infrastructure that we could kind of adapt for pronghorn, or if we'll need new infrastructure added to those areas. And then we're also looking to build support for investments in the infrastructure, as well as general support from the general public to do this work.
So this might sound like kind of a stupid question, but do they think they would be smart enough to go under an underpass or something like that, or what's their?
Where it's ideally it would be an overpass, but those are, you know, expensive. So we were looking at an underpass, and there have been some studies to show that if other species are using the underpass, pronghorn might use it as well. But there has to be, it can't just be like a big culvert. They're not going to go through that. They need to be able to see for predators and stuff. Like there's some conditions that they just won't go under or use an underpass. So, but we don't really want to base our decision on what infrastructure to use on that assumption, right? Like we don't want to assume that our pronghorn are going to follow deer through, like put in this big underpass and then find out that pronghorn actually aren't using it.
Yeah,
so,
well, that's.
Yeah, it's a lot of money just
You
to
can
kind of
do all that stuff, but if they're just gonna cross the fence.
Yeah, but there are other things that we can do. Like we can do some fence funneling. Like there's on the west side of Maple Creek, there's the train kind of goes over, so it's an underpass, but we can do some fencing to kind of funnel them along the train, and you know that would be their only option. The other thing we can do is reduce speed limits in the area, because vehicle collisions, one of the big things with collisions with wildlife is just people are driving too fast. So if you reduce the speed a little bit, then we might avoid some of those. And if you do that in certain areas, the areas that count, then we might be able to reduce some collisions and get pronghorn moving across them too. And then the other thing is just public education. So if people know what to look for, like it's a pretty iconic species. I don't think anybody wants to see like dead animals along the road, but especially those ones that people like really relate to. So if we can put up signage or something that shows what a pronghorn looks like, watch out for this species. It might like dart across the highway at the wrong time kind of thing. So if we can do some public education like that, then maybe that'll help too. But I feel like a combination of those things is probably the way to go. Jumping to an over, we need to have a lot of support for either an overpass or an underpass, because it's going to be in the millions to build one of those.
They can't get an overpass in the city for.
Yeah.
Did you say the app was still going?
No, I think the app is done. I think because they've already collected their data and identified the sites. So I think the app is finished for now. Yeah. So the other thing that we're working on is habitat, access to good quality habitat, which is native prairie for sure. That's what they like to hang out in. That's, you know, that's where they've evolved. That's where they find the best food and cover and stuff. So we want to make sure that they have access to that good quality habitat. And that comes down to fencing. If they can't get under those fences, like fencing is usually associated with that native prairie. And if they can't get under that fencing, it's hard for them to access that habitat. So they might actually be fenced out of a lot of good habitat for them. So the other thing that we're trying to promote is wildlife friendly fencing. You know, so we're trying to like promote that, but also recognize that some of those things that we're promoting are fairly expensive and time consuming to do. So we want to provide as many options as possible for some kind of wildlife friendly fencing that everybody can take advantage of. So that's kind of what we're trying to do on the fencing side. And we also want that wildlife friendly fencing to benefit other species because we do see deer getting hung up in the top wires of fencing, same with moose. See that a little bit. You see like birds flying into and getting caught in the wires. You do see other species affected by fencing. So we would, not just for pronghorn, but for other species. So I'm just going to do a few slides to show you some of the options that we're promoting. But basically, when you're building wildlife friendly fencing, the best thing that you could do is just have open habitat with no fences, as few fences as possible. But like, this isn't usually the best option because you do need, you know, when you're doing different types of grazing systems, you do need something to keep your cattle moving in different sections of your farm. So just having no fences isn't an option for most people. So then where you do need a fence, designing it and placing it in the right spots can do wonders for wildlife friendly fencing. So if you target areas where pronghorn are already crossing, they tend to find sort of the weakest spot in the fence, and that's where they will wander. If you can target those areas for wildlife friendly fencing, then maybe you won't have to do like your whole farm with that 3-strand barbed wire. And there's lots of different options. We have like a whole guide on the different options that you can do for wildlife friendly fencing. And you can find that, it's called the Landowner's Guide to Wildlife Friendly Fences. You can find that if you just Google it with Sask associated with it. But yeah, there are some things you want to consider when you're planning your fences. So the one thing that I mentioned before is, are there pronghorn that are, or other species that are already crossing at certain points in your fence? And are there certain areas of your farm that wildlife tend to use pretty consistently, like watering holes or something like that, outside of haystacks and things? Don't want them to access those. And then the other thing, consider topography. So if your fence is set, if it's placed on a slope, anything trying to jump up the hill is going to have a really hard time. And anything that's going to like try to jump on downslope is probably going to get hurt along the way because it's like a much farther drop. So that topography, trying to get your fence on flat ground where they're not having to jump farther or fall farther is pretty important for wildlife friendly fencing. And then looking at daily or seasonal movements on and off the land. So similar things, just looking for areas where wildlife, parts of your fence where wildlife are already using pretty consistently. So the most common one that we hear about is the 3-strand barbed wire fence. So having your bottom wire 18 inches off the ground and your top wire about 40, I think it's, what did it say, 42 inches, no more than 42 inches off the ground. And then just having your 3 strands. This is usually promoted as like the best option. And typically it's expected that it's the whole pasture that you have the 3-strand barbed wire on. But if there are parts of the fence where you already know that pronghorn, that's where pronghorn cross. If you do your 3-strand barbed wire there, then you may not have to do the whole fence as 3 strands. So that's one way to cut down the costs on that option. So that's like the typical one. I'm sure everybody's heard about that one. And then the other option is, so if you can't do 3-strand, if you have to do 4-strand and you don't want to put in a gate, because that's something that's promoted a lot of the time too. But like gates, you know, you don't really want to leave them open, like just to reduce trespassing and stuff like that. If you don't want to put a gate in, you can do this adjustable wire height option. So what you do is you've got your 4-strand barbed wire, it's separated, it just acts like a regular fence when you have cattle in there. But during the spring or the fall, when pronghorn are moving, where the pronghorn cross your fence, you can kind of tie the top 2 and the bottom 2 wires together. And that just gives them more space to either get under, as well as other things like deer and moose to get over top. So there's like an example of how you can do that with a steeple lock. But to me, the easiest option would just to get some PVC pipe and cut it lengthwise and then just slip it over those 2 wires. One of the cons that I see with this though is that you kind of have to have fairly loose wires to make that work. So what you could do for that particular section is just have separate wiring. So you would have like the wire for your whole fence, and then the part where you do the adjustable wire height, you would just have a little bit looser stuff going on there. So that's one option if you don't want to put like a gate in, and you don't want to do 3-strand fencing. The other option is to do lay down wire fence, and this is a really good one for elk. So if you have elk issues, like they're constantly tearing down your fence, you can just make like a really long gate, basically, that has, what are those called? The stays. So when you've got cattle in your pasture and you want to keep them in there, you would have that lay down fence up and attached to your posts. But during the fall, like maybe if you've got an elk herd moving in and out, you would just lay that lay down fence on the ground, and that will also allow pronghorn to move in and out. So that's another option. It's like a big gate basically. So you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons with having a gate versus not having one. But it's a really good option if you also have issues with elk. So basically what I wanted to show is that there's a bunch of different options for wildlife friendly fencing. It's not just the whole pasture and 3-strand barbed wire fence. You can kind of tailor it to work for your operation. And basically, like, you need to have a fence that works. But if you can kind of tailor it using these options to allow pronghorn to move in and out, then everybody's doing good. So yeah, and then I just really wanted to hammer down how important topography is for where you put your fence, and also making your fence visible, because that usually is part of the reason why lots of wildlife tend to have issues with fences. They just can't see it. If you have old fence that doesn't serve a purpose at all, removing it is a really good option. And then I just wanted to touch on page wire as well. I think everybody knows this, that page wire is probably the worst for pronghorn, because they can't get across it. But yeah, that's what I have for you guys today. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask.
I take it your work is species specific. Who is what's your counterpart for monitoring mule deer populations?
Oh yeah.
And how that ties into allocation of licenses?
Well, so we have species managers for mule deer, whitetail, moose, elk, black bear, bison, and wolves. And so each of us kind of decide on how many licenses we offer independently. But we all, like we do proposals. It's basically like a proposal that we're putting forward. So if I wanted to change the number of licenses that we offer for Pronghorn, I would figure out how many licenses and, you know, if there's going to be any changes to season dates and stuff like that. And then I would take that proposal and put it out to all the other species managers. And we discuss it based, you know, from each of our perspectives as managing those other species. And we would either go ahead with the proposal that I've put forward, or we would adapt it some way, or we just wouldn't go ahead with it.
So what's the producer opportunity for input into that decision?
So the best opportunity would be things like this. So this is a really great way for me to get in contact with people who actually live on the landscape and be able to talk to them, like talk to you guys about what you're seeing out here. Because we do include stakeholder concerns in our what we call season setting. So when we get together and decide on licenses, we do take into consideration what we're hearing from folks that call into the ministry or write letters or talk to me at things like this, or people that I meet like out when I'm doing field work or whatever. So we try to include those things. And then we also include crop insurance data. So if there's been, like for mule deer, I think it was a couple years ago, we saw a pretty big jump in the number of payouts for crop insurance because they were just in everybody's haystacks. So we take that's a separate data set that we bring in. So those are two sources that we used from folks out on the landscape. And then we also use vehicle collisions, so data from SGI. We do for pronghorn, we do ground surveys. For deer, we do aerial surveys, and then we also do spotlight surveys. So that's a ground-based one. So that's two data sources that go into mule deer. And then hunter harvest survey data. Yeah.
Was there one time the producers
Yeah, there's the.
Identify if they are having deer problem?
Yes, well, there was an app for monitoring, like if you see deer on the landscape or something, you can plug it into the Cooperative Wildlife Management System, CWMS. Yeah. But for issues, like if you're experiencing property damage from deer, we don't have like an app specifically for that, but you can call into the ministry or write a letter and let us know about it that way. Or you can make a claim with crop insurance. Those are the two ways that we find out about those things.
Just one more thing too, on your annual seasons and licenses. In the Southwest where I am at, we have Montana and Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, the seasons were at the same time.
Yeah. So yeah, we really try to coordinate things with other, like with Montana and Alberta, because we do share all the same pronghorn. So this year I went out to South Dakota to we have a biennial workshop where all the pronghorn managers across the states and Canada get together in a room and start talking about pronghorn management and the research that's being done and things like that. And that's where we try to coordinate those hunting seasons and license allocations and stuff like that. So
But sure, you know,
yeah, doesn't really.
the first day that Alberta starts, they're all in Saskatchewan.
Yep.
And they just move between Montana and Alberta.
Yeah.
Hunting seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the pronghorn down here are a lot more skittish. And I think that's because there's like the hunting seasons in Montana are a little bit more liberal. So they get pushed out of Montana into and then when we start hunting them, they get pushed into another jurisdiction. So yeah, they've kind of caught on to us.
They're not dumb.
No, yeah, they're pretty with it.
Keith?
So does chronic wasting disease affect animals?
Not that we know of right now, but I did see a presentation at that workshop that suggests they might be. We haven't seen a case of it, and we're pretty sure that there isn't. Much like isn't any CWD in pronghorn, but we're also really not monitoring for it. So it's hard to detect it if you're not taking samples for it. But as far as we know, it hasn't transferred to pronghorn, and the likelihood of that is fairly low.
Lord, did you have?
Oh, no, I just comment. If you have it again here sometime, bring the mule deer guy. I'd like to have it on.
Okay. Yeah.
Antelopes aren't a problem.
I know.
It's very rare on the highway, but
Yeah.
I mean, this summer, and the same with the crop insurance thing, they look after your winter forage, but.
Yep.
My wife will tell you right now, she'd like if you did, they ate all their flowers in her garden. And everything.
Yeah. They're
Well, and it's- has to do with antelope too, but this road from Council to Maple Creek, which is antelope having deer.
Yes.
And they haven't touched it with the mower.
Oh, yeah.
Like, get that shit
Mode.
good mowed when they're moving.
Yeah.
Especially when it's green in the ditch and dry.
Yeah, and you can't see nothing.
Yeah. And they're all in the
Thank
ditch.
God some guys hate it.
Yeah, that's what we used to
You're in
do.
a car.
Yeah, that's kind of, and RMs are getting bigger too, aren't they? Like, they've got more ground to cover.
So they're talking about all these underpasses and stuff like that, well, pretty simple
Yeah.
fixes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Use some daylight out, yeah. So have you seen some population growth in the antelope? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
just from a
Yeah.
shareholder, I mean, producer, like, I've seen a big, like, there's a lot more antelope than there were 3 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
On our
No,
country.
for sure. Like, we've since that
So I
drop.
just question your 20,000 like that.
There's a lot more. No, well, that's an estimate, but we're pretty sure, like, we estimate the population size using the same data collection methods and the same, like, math, basically. So it's comparable. It may not be, like, exact, but it's an estimate. But so over the last 10 years, we have seen, like, a consistent increase. Like, there hasn't really been much of a drop, but that's typical for pronghorn. Like, deer are a little more variable across years, but pronghorn, like, so from the 30s up to about the 80s, it was a pretty consistent incline, population increase. And then there was a little bit too much harvest and a series of actually, no, it wasn't bad winters. It was poor fawn recruitment. And the population just, like, dropped. And then you see that consistent increase for about 10 years. And then we got those bad winters in 10 and 11 and 12. And then it dropped again. So it's kind of like, and we're on an incline right now. So they've been increasing for the last 10 years. And this year we saw a 20% increase from the estimate last year. So we are seeing, yeah.
So what were the numbers like in Alberta, like just across the? Because as far as I know, they've never got.
Oh yeah, no, they've always had a hunting season. Yeah, I think they're pretty consistent with ours. Like, I don't think they see.
Because when you guys didn't have a hunting season, like where I live, I've never noticed it drop.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They all go more.
Yeah.
Become more urban.
Yeah, we saw enough of a decline then that we just couldn't offer licenses without having an effect on the population. Because the end game for hunting is to provide sort of a sustainable hunting opportunity that doesn't affect the population itself, so that it can kind of go through its natural processes and we can provide as many licenses as we can, kind of thing. But that, when we saw that drop, and a lot of our pronghorn, where we saw most of our pronghorn that kind of like died in that happened in Montana. And I think a lot of those animals came out of Saskatchewan and maybe not as many out of Alberta. So maybe that's why they could have offered that hunting season while we really couldn't, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Comment, I guess. Like the kites are really hard on the birds.
Mhm.
So it'd be nice to encourage some kite hunting
Mhm.
for business again or something.
It would be, yeah.
Another thing too is as far as habitat. Antelope are quite adapted to croplands nowadays.
I know, yeah, you see them a lot in like peas and lentils. And we're not quite sure if that's because they like to eat peas and lentils or if it just looks like grass to them. Mhm. Yeah, and those ones are usually a little bit tamer. You can get pretty close to them, but yeah. Anyways, I think,
thank you very much, Leanne.
Yeah.
Can you hang around for a bit?
yeah, I'm here till 4.
Oh, sorry.
Don's got one.
Oh. Go ahead, Don.
I just wondered if Leanne had any influence with the Tree Island Wire Company, because buying that smooth wire, the twisted wire, which we used to use high tensile wire, and it's not easy to use.
Yeah.
But we started using the twisted smooth wire, and it's nice and easy to use. But the darn stuff is way, way more expensive than barbed wire, and which makes no sense to me. And I don't know beans about making wire, but it stands to reason it would cost more to put the barbs in, but it doesn't. And when you go to buy the smooth twisted wire, it costs way more than the barbed wire. And so I imagine it's, it's whatever.
Yeah.
But
The double stranded, like ordinary barbed wire with no barb.
Yeah.
The double strand.
Yeah. Really? Yeah, there's way more on
It's about 3 to 1.
it. No, it's 40 rod rolls. It's the same.
It's half the size of a roll and it's double the money.
Where do you,
I've got about 30 miles of single strand in Buffalo Place. You can sure have.
Okay, we better move on here. Thank you very much, Leanne. And if you can hang around for coffee, and there'll be more questions likely as well. Our next speaker is up here already ahead of me, Michelle Keck, Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds. Prairie Watersheds Climate Program, funding opportunities for nitrogen management, crop covers. I think you need a raise in your salary.
I agree.
Thank you for being here.
So who is the Saskatchewan of Watersheds? Organization can protect water in Saskatchewan. We're guided by a board of directors that represents areas throughout the province. We have a head office that's located in Moose Jaw, and we have offices located in Swift Current and Gravelberg. The Prairie Watersheds Climate Program is led by the Manitoba Association of Watersheds, and it is funded by Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada. There's about $40 million in financial support through the On-Farm Climate Action Fund to producers to implement these different beneficial management practices. For eligibility, projects must either be a new practice or be an expansion of an existing practice onto new acres. All projects must be recommended, endorsed, or all projects must be recommended or endorsed by a licensed professional. So it would be an agronomist, agrologist, or certified crop advisor. Eligible projects require receipts to be between February 7th, 2022 and before March 31st, 2024. Throughout the province, there are agri-environmental watershed coordinators like myself who are able to assist producers with their applications. Applications are not available online. Some program notes: projects may require photo verification before and after. So if you're doing cover cropping, you might just have an after photo now because it's so late in the year, and that's okay. Projects can't be receiving funding from other government programs. And there's a $75,000 cap on all programs through the On-Farm Climate Action Fund. So there's 3 eligible beneficial management practices. There's nitrogen management, cover cropping, and rotational grazing. So on nitrogen management, one, there's use of nitrification and urease inhibitors, use of polymer-coated urea and melted urea products, agronomic support for nitrogen management plans, soil testing, and soil mapping. Adding legumes to crop rotations, upgrading seeding equipment to allow for banding, side dressing, and injection of fertilizer, as well as split application of fertilizer to improve nitrogen use, upgrading manure injection and incorporation equipment, and offsetting higher costs of synthetic fertilizer substitutes like manure, compost, or digestates. So funding will support BMPs that focus on the use of regionally appropriate cover crops that are used to prevent erosion and have that cover over winter. So these are fall planted cover crops as well as spring planted cover crops underseeded with the main crop, intercropping, and full season annual and/or perennial cover crops in rotation. These crops must not be intended for market, and they have to be at least 6 inches going into winter. So you can cut or graze, and then that 6 inches has to grow back. For this program, you can apply right now, even though you'll only have that after picture. So for the seeding costs and to plant that cover crop, they are going to give you up to $35 per acre to a maximum of $75,000. And then they'll also pay a little bit for agronomic planning with support of a professional advisor. Rotational grazing BMP activities supports fencing that supports rotational grazing plan, watering systems, and as well as improving pasture compositions by seeding legumes such as alfalfa or sandfoin, and a creation of a grazing management plan. Right now, we're working towards getting a list of people that can help with the grazing management plans. However, someone could help you with it, but it still has to be signed off by a PAG or a agrologist. Applications opened September 2022. Like I said before, producers will apply through an agro-environmental watershed coordinator. Applications cannot be accessed online. They will require a signature from a licensed professional. Application and projects will require verification. So invoices, receipts, sometimes it might require a bank statement or credit card statement. Payments will be issued to producers on a quarterly basis and after projects have been approved and verified. So you can find our program's fact sheets on saskwatersheds.ca. I do have some sheets at the back in the middle of the table that have those websites on them. And I also have business cards that have QR codes on the back that can take you right to the website. We have a cool little thing on our website that you can input your RM number into, and it'll tell you who your coordinator is that you would deal with. Since my manager couldn't be here today, she wanted me to talk about the district advisory committees. So what is the purpose of the DAC? As part of the restructuring process, the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds will set up district advisory committees in Saskatchewan. The objective is to have district watershed stewardship initiatives addressed. And the purpose, what we want to do is we want to bring in a group of individuals together who have unique knowledge and skills and have a passion for protecting and conserving water in our province. So we're looking for people in these different areas. There's just some towns listed on here, but it does list the different watersheds. So Cypress Hills, North Slope, Old Wives, Milk River, Poplar River, Big Muddy Creek, and South Saskatchewan. Members of the DAC would include 2 representatives from each watershed area. So it could be rural municipalities, urban municipalities, indigenous committees, industry, provincial, federal government, NGOs, or a research. So those are the different watershed areas. So the areas we're talking about go from up there all the way down here. So basically the entire southern portion. So if you are interested in being on the District Advisory Committee, you can contact my manager, Angela Waite. You'll be able to find her information on the website. If you are having troubles finding it, you can visit the website, or you can go to, you can phone or you can email, I guess, and that'll go to Leanne, which is our main program director. Any questions? Yeah.
I have a question on, you said on the, for the cover crops, it has to be 6 inches pointed in the winter.
Yeah.
So that would be able to take away grazing on those.
Yeah.
Those crops can never see a cow.
It could, if we had the rain, you could graze it and then have it grow back early on.
Oh, I see.
But in our conditions right now,
You could winter graze it.
no, you couldn't winter graze it. No, you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
Don't tell me. Yeah, don't.
I guess do we have to take it? When do we take the after picture? I guess. Next.
In October, so anytime this month. There will be audits, but I don't think there'll be people on the ground. It'll more be auditing the paperwork, the applications. Yeah.
But I kind of understood if you, as long as you only took half of it, like you could winter graze it, but you can't like graze it. I've actually heard you can hay it as long as you leave 6 inches as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, as long as they're 6 inches, they're going into winter. That's all they care, because they want that cover for the protection of that soil.
It didn't come back if you left 6 inches.
Yeah, yeah. We've talked about it a lot of times, and that's come up in discussion.
And I think that would fit too with your grazing, like as long as you didn't mow it right.
I was just thinking the nature of cows, if you got something like that sitting there versus some old grass and you get an open winter.
Yeah, you know, and being a cow guy, you're gonna let him have it.
Especially under these conditions.
On the first year though, wouldn't you, like with the wheat population, wouldn't you encourage them to get rid of that? Like by maintaining that, I mean, you're only asking for 6 inches, I understand that, but like the way the kochia and things will come with that, like,
Yeah.
I would think that wheat population would be one of the things you'd be concerned of. Another thing, I guess, there was a 2-year contract. You said there was $35 for, so what if you're permanently going back into permanent, like grass? There. Oh, no, sorry.
That one. So that would be adding legumes to the crop rotation.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What if you wanted to continue, like you wanted it back into grass?
It's not a program to regenerate your grass.
Just how it was cropland.
If it was cropland and you wanted to go back to grass. It doesn't.
Stock costs will figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I've tried this, not through your program, I've tried like intercropping, cover.
Okay.
And, what if it doesn't come worth leaving? Like I got, well, I got my first crop off, it silaged barley off, hoping that my cover crop would come.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, so you wouldn't get paid.
So I'm not
It's not
sure.
the expense of your seed.
Yeah.
With the intention.
Yeah. So we'll still put in an application for you and we'll just explain what happened with the intent that was there. It may not be at the top of the pile, but it's still, if there's money left over, they're gonna put that through at the end.
So you have no active dog floss.
No.
What if it hailed or grasshopper faded off, but you had good intentions?
Well, what they want the producer to be doing these practices anyways, not just because there's money.
You're not living in the real world.
Well,
I could say that. I mean, I have plans, so I'm putting back a half section of grass and I want to
yeah,
somehow get that established. It might go native, it might be one of these programs. but-
yeah. Yeah, so you're planning to do it anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not being convinced by the money, but.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. No, and I agree. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, I got one question. So that is not cost shared, that's a straight $35 payment, right? For it. Is there 50% bonus?
No, it's just up to $35, depending how much the seed costs. And yeah.
It's not a bad deal, really.
Yeah. Yeah, we're doing it on 90 acres that we don't have fence on those acres. And I think we're gonna get like $3,000 back on 90. And we used our own seed. So you can use your own seed and then you have to have 15% in kind. So our 15% in kind is gonna be that time to seed plus that equipment we use to seed. We'll get off the custom rate guide and that gives us that 15% in kind for that instead of the seed.
So real deal.
About that has to be on new acres?
It has to be on new acres, or if it's a existing practice for the producer, it has to be on expanded or like expanded acres that they haven't done it on before.
Okay, I think we're at coffee break. Yeah. We're also going to have nominations for the Sodcap board coming up. Kelly will be handling that. We have a few that we've consulted with already, but it'll be open to the floor as well. If you have any questions, talk to Kelly or Krista about what they do and what we do. So let's try and be back in 15 minutes, about 3 o'clock. Good.
I hope I answered your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a couple of spots, and I just thought you mentioned this to me, and I'll take care of it.
Those are the ones that
Fourth Thailand is coming back.
Yeah.
Always supposed
Our next speaker is going to let us know what's happening with the Stock Growers Foundation. Tom Harrison, undoubtedly one of the most well-versed people in the province when it comes to agriculture, industry, and conservation. So thank you for
How much? Go ahead, Don. So, like Leanne said, it's an iconic species, and my daughter took this picture, and I always like having that open picture, so that's cool to see her talk there today. Yeah, I'm with the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Foundation. That is an arm's length group from the Stock Growers Association. We are a registered charity, and we have the ability to hold conservation easements and conservation agreements, and we've been set up basically to look after conservation around grasslands and species of risk habitat. And we've received some funding from the Weston Family Foundation, and now Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And we do work in partnership with the Sodcap group, Kelly and Kristen, and this bunch of what was it? Anyway, well, we are a provincial-based organization, but with our funding, we kind of are focused at Southwest Saskatchewan. So if you look at this area, we're focused at the grasslands. So, things like the Missouri Coteau, the Sand Hills, the South of the Divide, the Cypress Uplands, those areas are important for us, and that's where we're concentrating most of our work right now. So, so this year, we've been doing a whole bunch of different things, and I just wanted to start going over some of the things that we have done. And probably we spent a lot of time this summer doing like monitoring and assessment. And the first picture I'm going to show you is on the top right-hand corner. There is Marika, and I want her to wave her hand. She's a new hire for the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Foundation, and she's been spending most of her time doing vegetation, range health, range condition assessment on a bunch of different ranches in Southwest Saskatchewan, and helping Diego from the Sodcap group. So just wanted to point that out. The biggest thing, there's two different sort of avenues we've been working at here this year, and one is we're doing a multi-taxa assessment at 28 different locations that include, at each one of those points, we're monitoring for birds with help from our people from Birds Canada. We're monitoring insects with help from Canadian Wildlife Federation and Ag Canada and the University of Carleton. And we're monitoring vegetation with the help of Sodcap, and they're doing that work. And hopefully next year, with the Living Labs coming on board, we will be looking at carbon at those 28 sites as well too. The other thing we've done is that we've monitored 7 new ranches. We've done the range condition assessment at 7 new ranches with the hopes of developing habitat management agreements with these producers and investing in their operations. We've also collected some of them had bird data collected at them, and we're just doing the analysis of that. So again, we spent a lot of time doing that this summer, and working towards signing more agreements with producers. So and the conservation agreements that we've got in place right now are basically habitat management agreements. Right now, and in collaboration with Sodcap, there's a total of 15 agreements signed this last year, impacting probably 100,000 acres of native grass, and we've allocated over $300,000 as producer payments to these projects right now. With the Weston funding, AW funding, a number of other sources that are going out there right now, and for the most part, they're grazing management plans, but and riparian management plans. but we're also looking at species control. We're looking at antelope migration and other things. So what we do with these plans is, you know, our process is that, you know, when a producer the desktop and produce a series of maps. We then go out and we meet with the producer, and then I'll send Diego or Marika out there, and they gather the field data. Sometimes we'll send, some of the sites have got birds data collected at it, and the Birds Canada people have been at some of those sites. And then once we have all that information, we've been sitting down with the producers and hammering out a sort of a management agreement with them. And if we come to an agreement, we cost it all out, and so we'll look at infrastructure costs, we'll look at management costs, and then we, you know, we come up with a formula where we can pay, you know, make a financial contribution to the producer. We then we actually run these agreements past what we call a producer advisory committee. It's chaired by Ray McDougall out of Maple Creek here, and it's made up of a number of producers in Southwest Saskatchewan here, and we have a Crown Lands person from the Ministry of Agriculture, and we have a representative from the Wildlife Habitat and Protection Act from the Ministry of Environment sitting on that committee as well too. So, and if they approve it, you know, it's passed on to our board approves it, and then we can finalize the agreement up with the producer and make the contribution. These agreements are typically, you know, long-term, so they're usually in that 15 years at least. We're hoping any kind of restoration agreement would be at least 21 years. You know, so, and that's what our funders want, is that we want long-term agreements in cooperation with producers that contributes not only to the biodiversity, but to the viability of that ranch. So, the other thing we've got on the work, and we haven't signed any conservation easements yet, or term conservation easements, but what we've done, we've had Bob McLean. He's a retired Canadian Wildlife Service employee who's actively involved in the land trust world, has been contracted, and he's drafted what we call a conservation easement policy for the foundation. Money flowed through the Stockgrowers Association, and that piece is pretty much done. The last piece we're waiting on right now is how much do we pay the producer for a term easement, and we're getting a little bit of pushback from Environment Climate Change Canada because of what they're trying to do is you know, it's got to be a fair market valuation comparison of what is it with an easement and what is it without an easement. And because no term easements have ever been signed, there's very little data available on it. So we're having to develop some sort of tool or model to kind of predict what a term easement would be. And we're working through that right now. What we've done so far is we've done the fair market valuation of 8 different ranches in the Southwest that have critical habitat for the greater sage-grouse. And there's been a model developed through Saracon out of Alberta. We've applied the model. You know, what it's showing us is that for a term easement of say 30 years, we would be able to pay about 80% what you pay for a perpetual easement. It's still not accepted by Environment and Climate Change Canada, so we're looking at right now doing a fair market valuation, or trying to do a fair market valuation on these ranches with a 35-year easement. But just like I said, the data is not there, and we're trying to figure out what those costs will be. So still a work in progress. I'm hoping that we will have that in place here by the end of the year, and we can move forward on making some offers to different producers that you know, are interested in what we call a term conservation easement. So anyways, and we do have funding from not only the West, but from Environment Climate Change Canada and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So I want to recognize too that many of the producers that we work with do an exceptional job, and over the last couple of years, we have nominated and some of these producers for the Environmental Stewardship Award. And just want to recognize people like Ed Bothner and Gerald and Patty Anhorn from both up in that north end of the Kyle in that area. They won it for the last couple of years. So I just want to recognize some of the people that we've worked with and that they do an exceptional job on grassland management. The thing that we've just got some approval for is what we call a reverse auction for restoration. And that's a funky graph if you've ever seen one. What's actually a reverse auction? Well, it's basically going to producers and saying, if you're interested in restoring cropland back to perennial cover using natives, we're going to ask you to put in a bid of how much it would take you to put that in and retain it there for a minimum of 30 years. So if you want to do that, then you would come to us with a bid, and we would rate it based on its potential for storing carbon. We'd rate it based on its potential for biodiversity, and rate it on potential for the producer's commitment to doing this, and then compare it to what the bid is. So if you look at this graph here right now, on this axis here, that would be how much you're paying for it. On this axis, this would be the number of acres that we see, and these graphs would be a cumulative bid process. So basically, what we would do is we would take in bids. We would take in the most cost-effective ones, starting there, cumulative, added it up to about this point, and anything under until we ran out of basically our budget cap, which is this budget line here. So as soon as we run out of money, we would say everybody under that line would be eligible for a restoration agreement. So like I said, this would be how much we get paid for a producer. And I don't know if I explained this good enough. We're just starting out the process right now, but the deal is we're looking for people who are really interested in seeding native grass down, and we need to know how much it would take to get you guys to put it in the ground and keep it there for a minimum of 30 years. So, and Brooks has got a question already.
What happens if you put it in and it doesn't come up, it's just a failure? What are you tied to then?
We're looking at investing in the forage insurance. So right now, if you think back a couple of years, Chad lobbied crop insurance to get the forage insurance covered off. Invest in that. It should cover your seed costs, and then go into a reseed process.
Oh, you can just go and try and reseed it.
Yeah.
Like, when it's sitting there 2 years and all you got is weeds.
Yeah.
You don't have to sit and look at it for 30 years. You can try and reseed it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That would be written into the sort of the agreement. So and we're lucky enough to have that forage insurance policy in there, and it's relatively cheap. I forget what it is, like $5 an acre. Do you remember this stuff?
That's what I know in my mind too, but I feel like that's low.
Yeah, but I mean, we would pick up that cost. So.
What if you resold it, Tom?
There's going to be an agreement on it, and there'll be an agreement on it where it's 30 years and it should transfer out. If it's an agreement that's not on title, there's probably a buyout option in there, so you basically have to pay back. Or if we sign an easement, it goes with the title.
So is the easement on the land or with me?
On the land. So it goes title. So if you sold it, then it would get transferred to whoever bought it from you, and they're responsible for doing that as well. And don't quote me because we're still in the planning stages. We're hoping to give an option for both and an agreement without on title and one with an easement. Obviously, you're probably going to get rated higher if you put an easement on it.
So what if there's already a mortgage on the land?
If there's a mortgage? Well, no.
Don't you secure it through the titles?
Well, no, it's just a restriction placed on the title, right?
It's not key yet.
Yeah, I would just say that you can't break that land up for 30 years. Because the money, here's the deal. The money is coming from Nature-Based Solutions, which is a carbon-based fund. And their goal is to sequester and retain the carbon in the soil. And that's what the money is for.
So can you see the cover crop with that, like?
Oh, yeah.
And then let it?
Yep. Yep. Oh, yeah. Like, whatever makes sense for you to seed the establishment, whether it's a cover crop with perennials, depending on, whatever you feel comfortable doing.
So my cost, if I've been seeded to lenticels, I guess I'm maybe more curious than others, because I have a half section, I would like to do something.
Yep.
So if it had been lentils, that, I could, every other year, whatever, it is also organic. But so how would based on what my curve would be? Is that?
Yep. No, it wouldn't based on that. What we would do is we'd assess your land, like you give me the land locations. We probably look at, okay, what's the potential for it to sequester carbon? So that's based on the soil type. We look at, what's its potential to provide biodiversity. Basically look at a conductivity to areas of habitat, increasing patch size. And then that would get rated, and then that would be adjusted for whatever your bid would be. So, if it rates up really,
I would think it would be fairly high.
it probably would, but we do it. And then we do a site visit with you and that, and hopefully.
When will this be available?
We are just in the planning stages right now. So this year is a planning year. We'll probably announce our first call for the auction either later this fall or in the early spring. And Sodcap will be one of the group, or will be the group to help producers walk through calculating their bid. So the key message here is think very, very carefully what you would want to bid, because you're committing to a long-term project. And so you got to consider, okay, if I'm growing lentils on here and this is how much money I'm making now, and I'm going to convert it to native grass and I can only run 6 cows on it. Well, there's a price difference there, right?
Well, crop insurance.
No.
Him and I were just talking about kind of the same thing. I've got the opposite of that. I've got native grass that is deeded that I have a mortgage on. So you guys are competing against me breaking it up and putting canola.
Well, right. And
like it's kind of compared, same thing, but
yeah. So the other tool is these conservation easements or a management agreement where we actually sign those agreements or easements with you. And then, financially we contribute to your management and retention of that native prairie, as opposed to what this is doing is trying to restore and add more acres into conservation.
Because it's hard to make a mortgage payment on our lands, and manage it properly.
Exactly. So this is where we would come in and chat with you about that. So we have a number of different tools with us to address both what you're doing and what Lorne's doing. So
yeah, because it's kind of
yeah. So we're trying to address both ends. So
what are you gonna do with native seed shortage? How are you gonna address that?
Well, I mean, that's good question. Good question.
Like if you're promoting this and it's very difficult to find certain types of seed right now, what are you gonna do? Like,
okay.
What's the plan for that down the road? Or do you have, like, I'm assuming you're going to build your seed blend on what's in the area, or are you just putting a blanket for everywhere?
No, I think what we'll do is we'll source out the seed ourselves. And I think what we've had a little bit of discussion about is to source a core blend, like, maybe a 4 or 5 species base blend that, you find in everyone. And then in the specific areas, maybe there's some other seed that you can gather and if it's solanacetic soil or it's a thin soil, maybe there's other species we can get put into there. But, we have 5 years and we're hoping to run like 3 auctions over the next 5 years, and hopefully the seed crops pick up. And I can't do anything about the production that's in there right now, and we know that the seed stocks are low, but I mean that's now. Hopefully the seed growers produce some more in the next level.
It's not limited right now. I think we can get enough seed to seed native grass, and we can max out our seeds.
From where?
Prairie.
Because like all the people I deal with, they're struggling to find the certain species. And when they find it, they're paying paying.
Oh, no, there's no doubt that cost goes way through the roof. If
Yeah,
you
so
want,
I'm
what,
just wondering if you're factoring that in though, right?
so that's part of the bid process. If you want western porcupine grass, you're not gonna find very much, it's gonna be $80. If you want purple prairie clover, it's $35, $45. That's the reality.
Yeah.
Our blends are probably 200 to 230 maybe dollars an acre to put in the ground. But we can find enough seed to, we don't run out of seed, we run out of people to put it in the ground. Like we could.
So what are you proposing for a blend then? Like what do you have? If you-
So the regular suspects, so we'll usually put northern, western, slender, purple prairie clover, blue grama, maybe June grass, western porcupine if we can get our hands on it, and needle and thread if we can get our hands on it.
So I thought the province wasn't, like, Ministry of Agriculture wasn't recommending slender wheatgrass in a seed mix anymore.
So this has nothing to do with Ministry of Agriculture.
Well,
this
I know, but like.
And slender wheatgrass in any of our stands, like I just took you guys out to a stand over by Wood Mountain. Slender wheatgrass usually is a short-lived species, so it dies out right away. If we can get a POA, we'll use that if we get our hands on it. But that's the usual blend. You really like to use slender wheatgrass because it establishes right away. It'll get that land covered and then it'll die. And so, yeah.
Are there any blends with like the forbs in it, like the winter fats and some of that?
So what's that?
So what, like the winter fats and some of those that can you get mixed blends with that in it? They were growing in a swift current.
The guy did all the research on that and sitting at the back of the room, but
he just woke up.
And the guy who went and did all the collections for the seed for his plots is sitting there.
Yeah.
There's never got, Canadian sources are almost very difficult to find. There is, I left 2.5 years ago, there was a plant breeder that was hired. And he told me as I walked out the door that he would be continuing to take and actually register the material we had. Now, how far along that road he's gone, I don't know. But
They had a lot of it, it's swift current, right? At one time, but no, maybe it's still there.
well, it's still there.
So we did winter, so we took a bunch of seed from those plots. We went down to the Shannon Power Station with the other nursery and we had a bunch of plugs done. We did sage plugs. We've done winter fat plugs. The sage plugs, we went and toured that site in the spring. They actually they caught. I haven't seen very much success with the winter fat plugs, but
I'll take the winter fat.
what?
Say if you don't have to, it's there.
Yeah, I'll show you that piece of mind.
But I mean, there's some sites we should go back to. Or Mike can correct me if here. It could be with the soil types that we were trying to put those in, and we should maybe be using some. Usually, when you see winter fat established out on site, lots of times it's on a gopher mounds and lighter soils and things like that. Where I've seen winter fat actually established out in the brain. Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong. What kind of soils?
Like that cobbly, rocky soils and stuff. Sage really likes the heavy clay. So if you walk across Grasslands National Park where they have winter fat and sage, you'll find the sage on the lower parts of the slope. Winter fat's on the top. So they like the different soil textures, different soil textures. And sand, but like sandy soils used to be also kind of
Next time I see a bunch of plants, they're not. You're right.
Yep, I'm almost done.
Well, you're lucky you got it.
No way, one more.
It's a great plant.
Maybe 2 more, 3, I don't know.
Sorry, Tom.
No, that's good. I love plant geeks getting together. It's almost like bird geeks, hey, Kyle?
Even more nerdy.
Anyway, the point is, guys, if you're interested in seeding land back and using natives, stay tuned. We're gonna be rolling this out in the next little while. We just got the funding announced and we just worked out the contribution agreement with the federal government. So, also, and you heard Mike talk, we're providing some support for the Living Labs project as well. And it's a while, we're gonna have sites all over, all over Saskatchewan and even into Alberta, like we mentioned, like Cameron's got 1-4 and Matthias and the conservation data center, or not conservation data center, but Silver Sage conservation site from the Alberta Conservation Association is in Alberta too. So pretty good project. A gazillion researchers and a bunch of producers in. The last thing I want to touch on is the communication. So Mindy, wave. That's Che's daughter, I guess. She's another new hire with the Stockgrowers Foundation, and I've had her mainly working on communications and developing the website, and she's been doing a bang up job. Hopefully the website will be live when, Mindy, or when do you think the website will be live?
Hopefully next week.
All right, good job. And she's getting the social media up and going, and we've got a few handles and some posts, and she's written a couple blogs, and I'm really liking what I'm seeing come out of there. We're also doing some tours and extension work and things like that as well too. Callie and I managed to take members of the Canadian Geographic magazine came out from A&W Canada, from a couple other places, and we toured them around to about 3 different ranches, and I think they really enjoyed themselves too. And it's just a shot of them at Miles's place. So anyways, get a chance to talk to Mindy and Marika if you get a chance. I want to acknowledge that we are not alone in this. We have a number of different partners that we're working with, either funding or actively partnering with us. And you can see the long list there, and I don't want to go through the whole thing, but we don't do this alone. We do this in collaboration with everybody else. So, and I'm going to leave you with some of our contact information of the 3 members there. So if you want to reach out to talk to any of these 3, go ahead. So, if there's any other questions, Keith.
Why does ECCC have a say in what this foundation pays for an easement? Are they personally funding this?
Yeah, they don't have a say in what, I use the Weston funding or NIFWA funding or other funding, but if they're providing money and they're providing like $900,000 into the one project, they can dictate, what the value is paid. And we're trying to play with them, play good in the sandbox with them.
But they use their easements as a benchmark.
They don't want us to undercut the existing model of perpetual easements, and that is like somewhere in the ballpark of about 25 to 33% of fair market value. I'm not convinced that represents the true value of a conservation. I think they're like if you actually look at what you're giving up to sign an easement on private land, if that land can be farmed, that land is greater than that payment that's the current model anyway. So there's one thing there. We're trying to figure out what that true value is. The other thing is we're trying to do build a model that reflects what that would be, or what the conservation easement value would be, say, as perpetual, and at what point in time is perpetual equal a term? Is it 100 years, is it 60 years, whatever.
So are they flexible at all on the price of their easements?
Well, it's always supposed to be a fair market valuation.
So that changes.
Yeah, so it's the difference with and without an easement is the biggest thing. And they've got to run it by their public appraiser or policy appraiser group in Ottawa. So.
What do they take into account? What is in the easement for restrictions? Like everybody talks about, especially the Saskatchewan government, no break, no drain easement.
Yeah.
I've never seen one.
You've never seen a no break, no drain.
There's always a whole bunch of other little things in there. And the ones that I dealt with predominantly are Parks Canada easements on land that they sold through the Saskatchewan Lands Branch. Oh yeah, just a no break, no drain easement. You could only run cows there 6 months. You couldn't feed cows there. You couldn't build a corral there. You couldn't build a barn there. But an oil company could come in and put an oil field there. And that's all that was in that. That was all in one no break, no drain easement in perpetuity.
Right. And that's
when you talk about what are you giving up? When you sign an easement like that, now you're giving up a whole lot of control.
Well, and that's exactly right. And that's why it is. They've been doing it on a case by case for if you sign an easement or you're proposing to sign an easement, that you have to do the fair market valuation without it and with it on there for your specific piece. So you take all those restrictions into consideration when you're putting on the value of that easement, or you should be, anyways.
I wish somebody would come up with a simple no drain, no break easement, like they keep talking about it, but I have yet to see one.
Well, I'll tell you, like, if you want, take a look at our policy and what we're proposing to have it in that easement, and it is basically no break, no development type. You know, you don't cultivate it, don't farm it, don't build houses on it, don't build roads.
Then they shouldn't have the oil rights or the gravel either. There should be no resources. They should stay the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the oil and gas rights supersede.
Yeah.
The crown always wins.
You're looking for that reverse auction, you're looking for 1,000 acres, right? What's your goal?
Well, our goal, we've got $2 million. Our goal is a minimum of 1,000 acres. Depends what the bids come in at, right?
But that's roughly
1,000 to 2,000 acres, depending on what we get. Randy, 5,000.
No, 1,000 to 2,000 acres is what the goal is.
Your ground is 300?
2 million.
Oh.
2 million. And then we match that up with another 2 million.
But $300 an acre to get it into.
No, that's the cost of the seed. So Randy, sorry.
I just want to clear up, the easement value is that difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
Between with the easement.
Without it.
So that's the value that you're basing the payment on, right?
That's what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah.
So if it's 50,000 difference, then you're gonna pay 80% of that, or?
For a perpetual easement, that's what it's supposed to be. Then we have to figure in like the term, right? And so the model that Saracon did, a 30-year easement worked out to 80% of what a perpetual easement would get paid for.
So if that 50,000 is.
Yeah, if it's a $50,000 payment for a perpetual, then yeah, and then using their model, it was 80% for a 30-year easement. So you get 40,000, right? So, but I'm getting pushback from Environment Canada on that model. So they're saying, well, we don't necessarily agree with that model or that tool, whatever you call it.
So is it a one lump sum then, Tom, or is it annually?
No. Well, we're looking at a lump sum. You could stretch it out over several years, and we've talked about that, depending on your tax situation, you know, but, you know, it depends on our funding sources and it depends on, you know, what you want as a producer.
So is that pushed specifically from Environment Canada, or is there somebody in the background that's protecting there?
I can't say that for sure. I'm sorry.
I got the answer.
There's always somebody in the back. Well, listen, partners, I see Carleton University, and I wasn't reading fast enough, but I don't see University of Saskatchewan or Regina. What's going on that our local educational institutions are not a part of?
Well, the good thing is that they are attached with the living labs right now.
Okay.
But I'll be quite honest, University of Saskatchewan's been somewhat reluctant to invest in the grass-based stuff. Most of our academic partnerships is coming out of University of Alberta and University of Waterloo, University of Carleton. You know, there's an interest in grasslands there, and now we're seeing it with University of Saskatchewan with the living labs. So.
Yeah, we're getting soil microbiologists, range specialists involved in some of the grassland work. We are looking at, away from quite a bit of involvement, maybe linked to perennials and agronomic species for sure, which we maybe haven't had a whole bunch of engagement in the past, but we are getting some soil microbiologist activity with the native grasslands.
There's a historical reason for that. Basically, there was an agreement years ago that Ag Canada looked after perennial species, the university looked after. That's backed out. The university was always told, maybe not this last. But yeah, the emphasis even with this has been very much more about an annual crop.
Okay, we better keep moving along here. Next up, our next presenter is Caitlin from PCAP, and PCAP has been a very strong supporter of Sodcap from day one, and she's brought all the equipment here, and thank you very much, Caitlin, for doing this.
No problem. Thank you. So my name is Caitlin Mroz-Sailer, and I'm the stewardship coordinator with PCAP. So I'm going to be talking super brief. I think she's got me down for 15 minutes, but I'm going to be fast. So I know we're behind schedule. So if you're not familiar with PCAP, we've been around since 1998. And right now we have 33 different partners. So we bring together kind of all the agricultural groups as well as the environmental groups to the table. And the idea is to increase communication. So one of the discussions we're having right now, reduce duplication and figure out, just gaps in public awareness and education programs, and then try to do something about it. So really we believe in having a healthy prairie ecosystem, a healthy economy, and respecting prairie culture. But all of this information is on our website, so I'll just keep moving along. We do a lot of public education programs and school education. Since we got going in 1998, we've reached over 67,000 students at over 1,200 schools in both urban and rural areas. So we get funding to reach kids through the through agribition. We do a pitch for pivots and plovers program. We talk about whose nest is this with cows. We got a new display. We're really excited about it. And we also do in-classroom programs. So since 2014, we've been doing two. One is called Taking Action for Prairie, and the other one is Adopt a Rancher. We have a new education coordinator, and you may have seen her at some of these events. So she just started with us, and we're looking forward to working more with her, and she's really, really excited to get in the classrooms, and especially after COVID too, we're excited to be back in person. So our Taking Action for Prairie program, since we've had COVID, one of the good things is that we've been able to adopt it for virtual, so we can reach some of the really remote rural schools, but we also do in-class ones. And it really focuses on the prairie ecosystem, diversity, adaptations, and threats. And it's like a hands-on learning program for students in grades 6 to 8. And they kind of do a group project, or they work with their class to come up with a project. And it could be anything about how to conserve water to composting, and just really learning about the environment around them and what they can do. So it really fosters responsibility and stewardship. So we have different outcomes based on the different grades, and Shirley works directly with the teachers to be able to make sure the curriculum needs are being met, and then also our goals are being met too. Yeah, so we're kind of getting good feedback from it, because we do a test beforehand and afterwards, and the kids get to work in small groups and then do this bigger class project. So we also have Adopt a Rancher program, which is really fun. Believe it or not, a lot of people don't realize where beef comes from. It's a very simple concept, but it's just something that we don't appreciate anymore when people are buying their food in grocery stores. So it's really connecting kids that may not have the opportunity to learn about what ranching is all about. So the program is aimed for grade 10 students, and they address the question, how can ranching protect Saskatchewan's native grasslands while providing economic benefits for Saskatchewan's people? So the grade 10 students work through that question and try to find the answers. So there's a few different components of it. Shirley, our coordinator, will meet with a rancher and just kind of assess the ranch, make sure it's a good fit, address any safety issues. They'll connect with the teacher, and they have kind of like in-class work before going out to the ranch, and then they have a field day where high school kids, grade 10s, actually get to go to a ranch and tour around. And then after the field day, they have kind of a case study and assignment to complete, and put together a report and have a discussion. So it's really about hands-on learning and getting boots on the ground, essentially. So we're looking for ranchers. If you want to be adopted by a class, you can let PCAP know. So our coordinator connects with the ranchers, and they put together a profile, and then we'll kind of do the legwork of connecting a rancher with a nearby high school, and then kind of liaising and finding dates that work. Obviously, it's not ideal to have kids there during branding or preg testing or shipping, and finding a time that works for the rancher and then the class as well, and then a group of 15-year-olds. And I recognize that schools in rural Saskatchewan are pretty small, so it's not going to be like 30 kids. And it's all free for the kids too. We have funding, and then they come out there and hands-on learn about what ranching is like. Oh, there's a familiar face there. Yeah, so that's kind of about our education programs. So this is me, Caitlin. This is our education coordinator, and then Carolyn. We've really been focusing kind of in the Regina, Moose Jaw, Saskatoon areas. Mostly that's just where we've been able to connect with ranchers, but we have funding to get down to the southwest area and connect there. So if you're interested, or if you have kids in school that would be the right ages, then feel free to let us know, and we can maybe do an appearance in the school, or yeah. So PCAP does lots of other things, and one of the other things that we do is we host a Native Prairie speaker series. So we do either an in-person one or a webinar, and webinar means you can watch it from anywhere. It's lovely, but we recognize there's a value in having in-person ones. So every year for, I don't know, probably 5-6 years now, PCAP's been able to host one of our speakers at the Sodcap AGM, and we're really grateful to be able to do that this year. So our next speaker is Ian Cook, and I will pull up the slides there.
Any questions for Caitlin?
Thanks, Caitlin. I'll try to keep us on time. I might be dropping slides as we go, but I'll try to cover all the things that I want to be able to cover. So my name is Ian Cook. I'm the Grassland. Yeah.
Take as much time.
Okay, lots of time. Okay, buckle in, I guess. Yeah, so I'm the Grassland Conservation Manager for Birds Canada. And just, I think I changed the title of the slide between here and Prairie, but just talking about protecting and encouraging biodiversity in a working landscape, which I think it may have stole from Sodcap actually. But a little bit about Birds Canada. So we are a nonprofit charitable organization that's been around since 1960. We started on the Long Point on the north shore of Lake Erie down in southern Ontario, and we've grown into a national organization since then. And we now have 4 full-time staff here on the Canadian prairies that work primarily on prairie bird conservation issues. So so as the Grassland Conservation Manager, obviously I get to work at the kind of the intersection of conservation and agriculture, and I get to work a lot with farmers and ranchers, which is actually what I grew up on a cattle and grain farm in Western Manitoba, where I still live in Western Manitoba, not on the farm anymore, unfortunately. But and then I've worked my whole career in agriculture as well, working before I came over to Birds Canada. So I'm excited and privileged to be able to continue to work with folks such as yourselves and great organizations like Sodcap and SSGF and so on. So I also get to work in a really pretty and complex landscape and a really fascinating group of birds that unfortunately have seen really significant decline since 1970. Many of you are probably aware of some of these numbers, and they're not getting much better, but since 1970, we've lost around 60% of our grassland birds, and that group, along with aerial insectivores, are the 2 groups of birds in Canada that are most in peril. So aerial insectivores are things like swifts and swallows and all those sorts of things, many of which will also rely on the grasslands and this landscape as well. So I'm not going to get too much into the doom and gloom side of things and what's driving all of that. Instead, I thought maybe I would talk a little bit about 4 of the more iconic grassland birds that are out there. Again, keep in mind that I come from an ag background. I'm not a grassland bird biologist. So if there are questions, or if I get something, or so if you have questions that maybe I can't answer, put Kyle on the spot, maybe. Yeah, exactly. But anyways, we can talk about it. So yeah. So anyway, so the first, some of these more iconic species that probably talk about, chestnut collar longspur is a songbird that occurs largely in this area of the province, but you can find it throughout. So these 2 pictures are both of male chestnut collar longspurs, and that's because they're going to be the most conspicuous of the 2. The females you won't see a whole lot, whereas the males will be up singing and flying around to try to defend their territories while also attracting mates. So for a grassland bird, they're actually quite striking. They have a black belly, they've got yellow on their throat and up on their face, and then they've got on the back of their necks this chestnut color, which is where they get part of their name from. They also have white tail or outer tail feathers that are white, and then in the middle they have black triangles, which makes them kind of distinctive. So if you see a bird kind of flush away from you and you see that black triangle, that's going to be a chestnut collar longspur, and the females have that as well, so that makes it a little bit easier to pick out the females in some ways. They have quite a musical song. It's not trilly or anything. It's kind of an up and down musical type song. And then they get their name, the other part of their name, longspur, from the big claw that they have on the back of their hind toe. So we get 4 different types of longspurs in the province, and they all have got that big long claw on the end of the toe. And kind of an interesting thing about chestnut collar longspurs is that if you're out looking for nests, they're often going to be right next to cowpies, old cowpies. And it seems like there's some debate on why that is, but probably it's just for more shelter, or it kind of keeps it a little bit warmer when it's cold in the spring and that sort of thing. So yeah, often it's mostly not much of a nest. It's mostly just a scrape in some ways with some fine grasses in there. But in terms of the habitat conditions that these birds like, you're going to find them in places that have maybe been grazed a little bit more intensely, or there's been extended periods of drought. But they really like some areas that have like the lower heights of the vegetation, and they like some bare ground, 15 to 30%. And when you're doing your range health assessment with the scrapes or with the raking, the low amounts of litter, 0 to 200 pounds is generally what they like. So they like those kind of drier, maybe areas that have been hit a little bit harder. So I put on here range health scores, fair to good. That's not a perfect sort of like, you can't take your range health score and say, oh, this is chestnut collar longspur habitat. But in general, in terms of the amount of bare ground and the amount of litter that's there, a score of fair to good is going to be something that might provide longspur habitat. These birds are fairly sensitive to any sort of trees or shrubs, so anything above 1 meter, they're going to try to avoid that. And any sort of human-made structures. Again, most of the grassland birds that I'll talk about today are something called area sensitive, so they need lots of room without roads essentially in them. So they'll tend to give those a fairly wide berth. In terms of beneficial management practices, they're going to see some themes as I go through these birds, and I'm not here to give prescriptions on how you should manage. The biggest thing is that the habitat conditions for all the birds that I'm going to talk about today can be achieved through grazing, and really rely on that grazing to create the habitat conditions that they need. So, you know, you can hit some areas a little bit harder and that sort of thing. That's gonna suit these guys just fine. Whereas leaving some areas with more litter and all that sort of thing is gonna serve other birds as well. So creating that mosaic and that variability of the habitat condition is really the main name of the game for grassland birds. Again, controlling woody vegetation. If you have shrubs, I know that that's maybe not as big of a deal out here as maybe it is in the eastern prairies as much, but controlling woody vegetation either through chemical or mowing means will help these birds out, and using native plants when you're gonna restore your habitat with SSGF. So anyways, those are just some general best beneficial management practices for those guys. On the other end of the spectrum, in terms of the habitat needs, are Sprague's pipit. So these are maybe more like what you would expect a little brown grassland bird to look like. They're more have that buff breast and the brown streaking on the back. But they do have very different body styles to most of the sparrows that you would see. They're a pipit, so they're kind of more long and slender, and their bills are quite a bit different than kind of the chunky sparrow bill that you might typically see. However, you're not going to see these birds very often on the ground, unfortunately, but you will probably have heard them. They have a really distinctive call, and they sing when they're way high up in the air, sometimes 300 to 500 feet up in the air, and trying, again, attracting mates and defending their territories. And when you do hear that, it's one of the first ones that I picked up on. It's really quite distinctive, and it's really neat. It's actually a bit of a problem when we're doing point counts, because you're trying to figure out whether that bird is 500 feet away or not. So it's trying to figure, so you can hear it quite a ways across the prairie. They're mostly going to eat some ground insects. Grasshoppers are a favorite, ground beetles, that sort of thing. They do prefer native, but I have seen them in tame grasslands, but they will prefer the native for the most part. And again, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum as far as habitat conditions, they like 15 to 30 centimeters. So a pen or a pencil is about 15 centimeters. So above that, they like higher vegetation, and they like a little bit more litter, around 300 to 900 pounds. But like the chestnut collar longspur, they will avoid trees, and they're going to avoid shrubs, but they'll avoid bare ground as well. So whereas the longspur likes some bare ground, these guys don't really like that much. So again, creating that mosaic and the habitat variability is pretty much the name of the game for grassland birds. So leaving some carryover for these birds, again, controlling woody vegetation. if you are gonna take part in some of the legume seeding and that sort of thing, in general, if you can find legumes that are gonna be more low growing, rather than something that's gonna form like quite a large shrub, like a sweet clover or something like that, that's gonna be better in general for most grassland birds. We're gonna try to avoid some of that vegetation. So something like clover, or looking at non-natives, slicer milk vetch or trefoil might be a good option as well. And then using fine grasses if you're not looking at natives, and kind of avoiding some of the smooth brooms or crested wheat. Crested wheat just doesn't quite form that litter layer that these birds like. So yeah. Sparrow is up next, and they're going to have very similar habitat conditions, but again, markings are quite similar. So I included both of them because their markings are similar, but their body type is really quite different. Where Baird sparrow has quite a large sort of conical bill, so they look visually in their body quite different. But they've got the yellowish face, and they've got the mustache marks, and then the necklace of streaking along there. Again, tough to see. Lots of times they kind of scurry like mice through the grass a lot of the time, but you will be able to hear the males, and sometimes they'll perch up on rocks or on some grass and to sing. So so Baird sparrow will actually tolerate some shrub, not tons of it, but they will tolerate some. But they avoid trees, and again, similar sort of habitat conditions as the Sprague's pipit, where they avoid the bare ground, and they prefer sort of some litter and prefer that taller vegetation. So because of that, they have very similar beneficial management practices and things as the Sprague's pipit. So leaving some carryover, again, using, if you're looking at legumes, trying to get ground growing legumes. So, and then the last one here is ferruginous hawk. So we're getting away from some of the songbirds and talking more about our largest hawk in North America. She saw 2 or 3 on the way here. So these are fun birds to see for me. They're like I say, our largest North American hawk. They have those really broad and long wings. And then one of the ways to kind of tell these guys is that if they're a white morph, they're a little bit easier to tell, but they've got red legs. So when they're flying, they form kind of a V when they're flying. That you can see that's red down at their legs there. So that's kind of a tip off for you for these ones. In terms of where they nest, they usually nest in isolated trees, so either along their riparian areas, or occasionally they'll nest on rocky edges, and very occasionally on the ground, but usually they're going to nest on those isolated trees. They eat primarily small mammals, especially Richardson ground squirrels, and actually a pair of ferruginous hawks will eat up to 500 gophers in the summer. So they rely on mainly large tracts of native grassland, but they do make use of smaller areas, and so any sort of grass is important for these guys, and they will roam fairly far and wide away from their nesting, or from their nests to go hunt and that sort of thing. So, so again, kind of hammered on it a little bit now, but creating variability is important for ferruginous hawks as well. Having places where they can see the prey quite well in shorter grass, and then some areas that are taller where they can hunker down sometimes. That's going to be really beneficial for them. Restricting grazing in those riparian areas sometimes with offsite watering and that sort of thing, just trying to keep some of those isolated trees and sometimes dead trees standing for ferruginous hawks to nest in. And if you are replacing trees like shelter belts or anything like that, try to use native species of trees like cottonwoods. And the biggest thing or one of the big things for these is that they rely largely on Richardson ground squirrel as their food source. So if you can tolerate Richardson ground squirrels, that's one of the best things to do. If you are looking at poisoning and having to control that way, trying to do that in when the hawks aren't around as much as possible. So kind of in that late fall to early spring sort of time period. I was doing some reading on this. There's not tons of data on this, but there is some evidence to suggest that when we're using lead ammunition to control Richardson ground squirrel, they tend to fragment, and then golden eagles and ferruginous hawks will ingest that, and that tends to affect them a fair bit. So may not always be fatal, but it does affect their fitness. So there are some options for copper ammunition. I know that it's more expensive, but you can get 22 shells that are copper, and it's just maybe an option if you are controlling gophers that way. And then another big thing, if you do have ferruginous hawks nesting on your land, is just trying to give them as much space as possible to not disturb them during that nesting period. And so from March 15th to July 15th, if you can try to give them kind of a half a kilometer buffer if you're on foot or in your pickup. For heavier equipment, like if you're digging a dugout or something like that, or just trying to give them a little bit more space. So yeah, that's the biggest thing for ferruginous hawks. So. Okay, maybe we'll transition a little bit away from talking specifically about grassland birds and their habitat needs and talk a little bit about the work that Birds Canada does in collaboration with Sodcap and Saskatchewan Stockgrowers Foundation. Well, that's tough to read, but just wanted to set the stage a little bit that obviously Birds Canada, we recognize that this is a complex landscape in terms of land use and land ownership, and that 90% of the grassland that still remains is owned by cattle producers. So obviously prairie landowners and cattle producers play a huge role in grassland bird conservation. And we also know, like I just mentioned, that grazing plays a huge role in creating the habitat conditions for these grassland birds, and that well-managed cattle can do that role really, really well. And and then also recognizing that grasslands are massive carbon sinks, and then that tilling releases a lot of those carbon stores. Temperate grasslands can store up to 200 tons of carbon, and they're mostly underneath the soil. And to put that into perspective, that's actually more than tropical forests for the most part. So there's lots of value in the grasslands for a lot of people, including us who are interested in birds and the grassland birds themselves. So just to quickly mention that we're fairly forward in putting that message out there to our supporters, and we've written 3 or 4 different articles to that effect that have gone out to our over 70,000 supporters, just talking about this connection between cattle producers and grassland birds, and that keeping cattle on the landscape in Western North America is one of the best mechanisms that we have to keep grasslands intact. So we're also recognize, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of risk revenue gaps between keeping grass intact and those types of production systems and those annual production systems. That often it just doesn't make financial sense to keep grass intact if you could be producing annual crops. So Birds Canada is trying to, what is our role in trying to contribute to grassland conservation, and how can we contribute to maybe looking at ways to be able to close those risk and revenue gaps and make these biodiverse production systems more profitable and more competitive. So there are a few ways that we are trying to contribute to that. The first one is the Grassland Conservation Incentives Guide, which is a publication that we put out, and I try to keep as up to date as possible. that tries to compile all the different programs and incentives that exist on the prairies and put it into one document so that for you folks, if you're looking for something to get involved in, you might be able to leaf through this and find something that you want to find out more information on and have it all in kind of one place rather than spending hours searching on the internet, but you also have relationships, organizations too as well. Some fun for the projects you're interested in. The other document that we produced is the production practices guide. I'm not much of a marketer, afraid that's a bit of a mouthful, but this again is trying to connect producers with some of the resources that are out there for biodiversity friendly practices and all those sorts of things. PCAP has lots of really good ones, and just trying to put them into one place and kind of breaking them out by the different categories so that it's maybe a little bit easier to get your hands on some of those resources that do exist out there. And then one of the other avenues that we're collaborating with or that we're exploring is something called the Bird Friendliness Index. And so through our work with Saskatchewan Stock Growers and Sodcap and the bird monitoring that we're doing, so we're doing the bird monitoring as part of that collaboration and to get a handle of the bird communities on there, and as well as trying to advance this Bird Friendliness Index, which is an outcome-based indicator that uses the bird communities at a farm or ranch level as sort of a representation of the biodiversity benefits that your farm or ranch is providing. And the intent here is to be able to eventually be able to communicate positive impacts that farms and ranches are having in terms of biodiversity, and maybe being able to enable some ways that will close some of those risk and revenue gaps, either through market tools or policy tools. So if you're able to say, I'm providing, this societal good, maybe we can look at ways to be able to provide fair compensation for that through different mechanisms. So that's the intent. We're still in the early days of this, obviously, but that's something that we're really trying to work on. So I'm not going to go super in depth on how this is measured, but I will just pick out some key components. So it is an outcome-based indicator that's based solely on the bird data. So based on those on the bird inputs into this. So there's no sort of like habitat modeling or anything like that. It's just based on the bird outcomes. So there are a few different things that go into that as far as bird data. First, how many birds are at the farm or ranch, the conservation need of those birds. So species at risk and those sorts of birds like Sprague's pipit and just like collar longspurs, they're going to be weighted more highly than maybe those more common birds like western meadowlarks, but western meadowlarks still contribute to this bird friendliness index. And it looks at the grassland bird community as a whole and isn't focused solely on species at risk. So they're just weighted differently. And then it also takes into account the diversity of birds that are present on a farm or ranch as well. It's measured at a farm scale in order to get that representation of what the biodiversity or the bird community is at the farm scale and be able to communicate that effectively. So it's scaled between 0 and 1. So a farm or ranch will receive a score that falls somewhere between 0 and 1, and anything above 0.5 indicates that that is above average for your region, essentially, that you're providing greater benefit to birds than the surrounding landscape, essentially. And through that process of comparing it to the surrounding landscape, we get kind of a standardization process that gives us a relative comparison as to what's going on with the bird community on your farm or ranch compared with the landscape surrounding it. And that allows us to kind of hone in on the management practices and the benefits that they're providing, while also mitigating mitigating some of the things that are beyond a producer's control. like weather events and those sorts of things that may affect the bird community, but you don't have any control over the weather, obviously. So, or else it'd be raining right now. So as part of this program, like I say, we work really closely with Sodcap and the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Foundation through the Western projects. And so primarily our sites in Saskatchewan have been on those farms and ranches and pastures that are participating in those agreements for the most part. So in 2021, we did about 1,200 total survey stations in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And then in 2022 here, we were able to increase that a fair bit, and we're able to get on to over 2,000 total survey stations in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, representing just about 310,000 acres in both those provinces and 36 different unique sites that we were on. Again, in Saskatchewan, that primarily on those sites that are participating in SSGF lands. So I think, yes, yeah.
And this isn't just directed to you, but when you go to whatever 2,100 spots, and this is kind of an RN question that's getting brought up. These outfits, they come, they do their study, they do their count, they do their whatever, they take off, and nobody hears moves from it. The landowner never hears, what'd you find?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
RM, if it's a big study, like there's been outfits that come and stay in the community for a week, get to know the people, come for a week, go.
Right.
Never hear about that. But like, I think it would be in your guys' best interest, and all of them. Calgary Zoo comes out fired up. And I finally started saying, well, yeah, you can go out, but I want to report.
Right.
Like I should have a file of information that these people, these groups are finding on my land.
Yeah.
You should have a data sharing agreement. And as we work through our living labs process, all these sites that we're working with the landowner, there will be a data sharing agreement so that they get to take data from you and they got to share that data back.
Well, that's what I finally see. Like, and they all say, like, the last one was Calgary Zoo trapped swift fox. I said, I'll let you out there, but I want to report. Oh, yeah, that should be no problem. You'll get a report.
You just take a picture.
No, not a, no.
So we do get cooperative reports. Because we want this to be like a learning exchange, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what are you doing to get all these birds here? But also for us, like learning what works on the landscape.
But I'm not picking on
No,
you.
no,
You guys
no.
might, but how can we get everybody to?
Yeah.
Just contact us down the road as we go through the process of our living labs. We can give you an example of the data sharing agreement, and if you want to use it for people coming to you, we'll gladly share it.
Because like I said, there's not people coming and going just off my little place.
Yeah.
Like, I should have
Yeah.
full of stuff that they've found in the past
Yeah.
10 years, and I don't have a single piece of paper.
Yeah. That's something that we really try to do. And, you know, again, well, part of the reason of this is trying to, you know, learn from one another, right? So, yeah, we try to, or we give reports. I think most of our reports in Saskatchewan were kind of delivered through SSGF and Sodcap actually, but yeah, what species we found, how many we found, some of the more interesting species, all those sorts of things. And then we also try to provide some habitat information and some interesting facts and that sort of thing about them. So yeah, no, you're totally right. Like it should be a back and forth learning. So that's something that we really strive to do. So, but that's good feedback to make sure that we remember that in the past and for colleagues, right? So
But there's a lot more groups than just you.
Yeah. Sure.
PCAP is a speaker series too, so I'm gonna make a note, like at Calgary Zoo, maybe they can just talk about some of their work and like it'll be a webinar that goes around. Like we did one recently with Great from the Owls, and she was doing work in this area, one recently with bats, like in the Hills area. So that's one way to kind of get the
It's not a
Yeah,
big report.
Calgary Zoo, they were here for, I
Yeah.
don't know, like a month almost, just to see how it's.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah, and even from us, like I know that there's a bit of a delay, right? Like there for us to be able to provide those reports because we use automated recording units, or autonomous recording units, sorry. So to process that data sometimes takes some time, but yeah, we certainly do strive to get that information back to you. So yeah, so those points that we do are a combination of both in-person point counts as well as using autonomous recording units. And there's Kelly Williamson right there deploying an autonomous recording unit. I'm not sure where that's at. That's from a couple of years ago. But
I think that's why East End.
yeah, okay, there you go. Yeah.
That's Prairie.
Didn't work.
Yeah, so again, combination of in-person point counts, which are kind of your traditional, somebody goes out and listens and watches for birds for 5 minutes, but then we're also using these, which will kind of replicate that in a lot of ways. They record for 5 minutes in the morning, and then we take those recordings and somebody in the wintertime listens to them and watches them on a screen, and then we get the different birds that were there and how many and all that sort of thing. So sort of two different ways of going about it. And then I just provided a little bit of scale there, the best scale I guess that was available on that pasture that day. It was a skull, but so they are fairly small units for the most part, except for the one that Kelly was doing. Those are the heaviest ones. I forgot I had this slide in. Anyways, so yeah, this is kind of what it looks like when the contractors are listening to them in the winter time. And just picking out the different birds that are on there. So we do 2 different sets of recordings. We do one in the morning, which is going to replicate that point count. And then we're also doing nocturnal recordings that aren't contributing necessarily to the bird friendliness index right now, but they are providing some really interesting data for us, targeting some of those night calling birds, as well as some amphibians that we include that in the report when we have ARUs at a farm or ranch. We include those birds that we found through the nocturnal recordings. And it's just been really interesting seeing the different things that we're finding. This is a Manitoba example, but through using these automated recording units and listening at times, that it's a lot harder to send a person out in the pitch black to listen to birds. So, but when having a recorder out there, we're hearing some things that we haven't really heard in the past. So in Manitoba, we had 2 separate detections of common poorwill in kind of fairly different habitats. This is a fairly hilly portion of Manitoba. It doesn't quite pick up on the picture, but it is hilly, I promise. And then, so that was one detection. And then the other place is kind of what you'd expect for Manitoba, kind of quite flat and surrounded by quite a bit of cropland. So it's interesting to pick up these two detections, and those are only the 4th and 5th detections of those birds in Manitoba. One was from 1999, and the other 2 were from the 30s. So raises a whole bunch more questions than it answers. Like, are they here more often than we know, and we're just able to listen at these different times? But it's been really interesting. And Kyle's already heard a few of these guys on recordings 5, or yeah.
Just know it's been a couple
Yeah.
of them, kind of just ease of interest there.
Yeah, which isn't totally out of the, they do occur in Saskatchewan quite a bit more than they do Manitoba, but it's just really interesting to be able to see some of this. So, and then we talked about the reports already, so got that covered up. So all that's left to do is to thank all of our funders and our partners. So we do receive funding from Environment Climate Change Canada. Like I mentioned, we've received funding, and also work closely with the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Foundation and their Western Family Foundation projects. In Manitoba, I get a significant amount of funding from the Conservation Trust. The Fish and Wildlife Development Fund here in Saskatchewan as well contributed to it. And again, we work very closely with the South of the Divide here in Saskatchewan. So thank you to everyone that makes our work possible. And hopefully we're able to contribute to grassland conservation going forward. So if you want to learn more about any of our projects or read any of those articles that we put out to our subscribers, birdscanada.org/grasslands is the place to find all that stuff.
So does Environment Canada give you guys access to their speakers, microphone deals they put out?
No, so any of the ones that we use right now are either owned by us or owned by SSGF or Sodcap. So, yeah.
Because I know they have.
Yeah, so I didn't really talk about
They did buy us a bunch of them. I mean, the ones-
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they provide funding for us to buy them. So, yeah.
I thought they would give you information that they got.
Oh, so also that, yes, yes.
So you like share their information they're getting off of their.
Yes, yes, yeah. All of that data that the Environment Canada is like through the Grassland Bird Monitoring Program is kind of feeding into the, developing the bird friendliness index and all that sort of thing. Yes, for sure. Yes, sir.
Randy, and then, go ahead.
I guess just the comment, you're using these recorders.
Yeah.
I got a question the accuracy sometimes because it's all computerized identified, right?
No, so it's actually people listening to those recordings and identifying them. So they'll listen and then they watch these what we call spectrograms, and then they denote the birds that are on that they hear. So they're trained folks that do it. It's not just artificial intelligence doing it. Yeah.
And there's a follow-up, there's a quality assurance afterward, like after the recordings have been processed, we subsample a portion that's been processed and it gets checked to make sure it's correct. And if people make errors, too many errors, they don't contract anymore.
I'm just glad to hear that because I got the data from Washington, Environment Canada said.
Okay.
And that went to the University of Alberta, and I believe it was all identified by the computer.
Okay.
Anyways, they come back with goats and chickens.
You don't have any of those out there?
No.
There's no
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. There's no lease agreement for goats or chickens. No, yeah. So they are a lot of work, to be perfectly honest with you, because you got to go out there twice. Like we move them, or the way I do it in Manitoba at least is I move them every week. So I'm trying to cover 6 sites with a recorder. So, but some of the benefits are that you can have them out there when maybe it's not a great point count day, and so I can go out, put recorders out so that the next good weather day they're going to record and all that sort of thing. And for a schlub like me that can't identify birds, I can be a mule and I can put ARUs out. But yeah, they are they're a good tool, but they come with a lot of work. But there's pros and cons to everything, right? And some of the pros is the additional data that we get as well.
Good to hear. And then I got the second question.
Sure.
The 3 bird species that you showed there.
Yeah.
You recommended to control woody species.
Yeah.
So is sagebrush considered a woody species?
No, I'm talking more stuff that's gonna grow to over a meter for the most part, like those shrubs that are gonna get quite tall.
What I see at home is sagebrush is taking hold.
Okay.
Especially in these dry years, it does so much better. And like it's filling in large areas where there was longspurs and stuff. So I'm thinking down the road, if that keeps going, we're gonna destroy a lot of longspur habitat.
Right.
Plus, cows don't eat sagebrush.
Right.
It's not much good to me either.
Yeah.
But under the Environment Canada prohibitions for sagebrush, you can't destroy the sagebrush.
Right.
So I sure wish you guys talk to Environment Canada.
Yeah. I will make a note to ask some questions. But
we're losing a lot of the prairie birds.
Right.
Keith?
Yeah. I think you should get some pictures of better cows, but that's just me.
Like crappy.
A lot better cows in the world.
Yeah, no kidding. I was pretty desperate for a picture with cows and a bird in it. Yeah, I know. That's a good
question about water. If you ever, I was wondering how important to these birds is groundwater. Like we have shallow water line and troughs of windmills. We have solar pumps pumping out of wells into troughs. Is that enough for these birds, or have you ever looked at that?
Oh.
Like I'm assuming they'll use a trough if there's nothing else.
Yeah, for sure they will.
I just wondering if you ever looked into that.
Certainly it will affect their distribution on a pasture, right? Like when we were looking at putting those multi-taxa sites that Tom was talking about, they're going to center around even those off-site watering like troughs and dugouts and that sort of thing. So yeah, those types of water sources are going to be used by these birds as well. In fact, the first time that I saw more than 5 chestnut cow larkspurs, it was at a water trough on one of the community pastures in Manitoba. So yeah. Does that sort of answer your question? Yeah.
Kyle's not species specific, Phil?
I was just kind of racking my brain thinking, because I know a lot of birds will just pick up water on all the insects that they eat.
Yeah, I was just gonna say like the pipits usually pick up on high plateaus, and there's not necessarily a whole abundance of water up on some of those big flat areas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
You never see a brood in a dog sitting on a trough like that.
Okay, yeah.
Like maybe they drink out of a slough or something, but yeah, I don't know.
I water on a solar pumping system, especially last year and this year. And I've noticed more birds around the dugout where I'm using the solar pump and have the dugout fenced out so the cows can't get to it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So you think that's a water quality thing, or?
No, I think it's got something to do with when cows go into a water hole and they're sinking knee deep into mud to get to it. They're changing the landscape around the water hole where it's rough with deep holes. If they're not going into it, it's smooth.
I know that is something for piping plovers for sure, like fall into those holes and can't get out. So maybe that goes, yeah, that's really interesting.
It would be nice to have water where you didn't need the solar pump.
Yeah.
And you still have, there's still programs available for putting up hawk poles. I think there was one time.
There was at one time, I don't know, are there still?
They've sort of dropped that in favor of sage grouse now. So there isn't funding programs, particularly down in this country. In your country, I'm not aware of any funding, but it would be less frowned upon. Down here, they decided of the two, they're gonna prioritize sage grouse, and so then they were recommending that you not put up hawk poles down here.
But they recommend we don't poison gophers from March to November, which is current gopher poisoning. So why can't we put up a hawk pole?
Would you like to put up hawk poles?
Huh?
Would you like to put up some hawk poles?
Yeah, but
Okay, we can make an application maybe to Commission or whatever. We might be able to find some money.
We'll take the fruit and hawk and
Yes, Don?
I want to ask you a question about gophers and poisoning. It has been my observation, and this is only a dirt farmer observation, that the hawks don't eat carrion. Certainly, crows, ravens, eagles do, but I've never seen a hawk do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm starting to get well out of my area of expertise, but Kyle, I don't know whether you've got any insight into that?
No, but I would agree with that observation that, yeah, I've never seen hawks eating brook.
Yeah.
I know that in some of the,
When they're young, though, you see them dead on the road all the time, and they're picking up roadkill. The only thing I've encountered that with is I've seen eagles eat hawks, and I didn't know the hawk didn't eat them. poison gopher.
Yeah.
I mean, the gopher poison, I tell you, most of us do, and we can't make a living right now with gophers.
Yeah.
We've got the badgers, and aren't they?
Special.
They are.
But I've heard part of the problem is they don't catch them before they die, like they're squirming around on the ground trying to die, and that's catch them and eat them. Then they go.
The bit about secondary poisoning with strychnine, they did a study at Maple Creek 2 years in a row. 12 sites, and I can't remember how many spots per site. But the conclusion from James Tansey was that hawks or raptors will eviscerate a gopher that's been poisoned. And that strychnine has a very bitter taste to it, so they will not eat. They will not eat the guts out of something that's been poisoned. And that was a 2-year study done by the ministry at Maple Creek. And I don't have a copy of it, but it is available.
I haven't seen that study, but we have tested at least 2 eagles this summer that came back strychnine poisoned. I'm not sure how often that happens with eagles, but it would have to accumulate in the body, so they would have to eat enough of them for that to be lethal for them. They could eat a few of them and then just kind of fly away and decide not to forage in that field again, but we have seen cases of it. I haven't seen James's study, so that would be kind of interesting to look at.
So were they poisoned on purpose?
I don't know. That could be another thing. It's pretty hard to, because we just find them dead. Somebody will just call in, like they found a dead eagle somewhere.
Somebody was poisoned with something else.
What were they beating all them stations out along the 41 out here? Because they were trying to get the raptors. I assumed it was, you have any idea, Randy? I mean, they were baiting them.
Well, they were trying to kill owls
and the ravens.
I forget what the chemical.
I mean, why would that get an eagle? And that's environment Canada, but no bait stations. Like, I mean, and now you show that find 2 eagles dead there when you're saying people, your people are dating them?
Was that in habitat? Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, I don't know what the chemical was they put in the eggs. Supposedly wasn't supposed to harm hogs.
But I heard that same report that Larry was talking about where the hawk actually eviscerated the gopher and laid out the elementary tract and didn't eat that, ate the rest of the gopher. Just,
They do that. Yeah, they do like shred. That's great.
Yeah.
And they'll, at least, I'm not sure about hawks, but owls, they bite the heads off first. So you find like burrowing owls, if you like find a burrow or whatever, you'll find a lot of like endless mice hanging around. And great owls do that as well, though. Like,
leave the head.
yeah.
They do it with cats. Which ones? Which ones did you do it as a cat? Oh, yeah.
Good.
Oh,
Well, in the essence of time, I think we should move on. Thank you very much for your presentation. And thank you to all of our presenters, a very informative afternoon. And thanks to staff for recruiting these very knowledgeable people. So I guess with that, we're on to our annual business meeting, which will not take an hour and a half. And supper will be provided here immediately following the annual meeting. So you have the agenda on your sheet. Is there any additions to the agenda? Anybody think of anything else they'd like to add on? And whoever leaves the room are going to be on the Sodcap board, so.
I'm watching Leanne go.
Thanks for coming, Leanne. Hearing none, would somebody move the adoption of the agenda?
I did that.
Keith, thank you. And a seconder? Larry, thank you. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Good. The minutes from the last annual meeting are contained in this report, I guess, which you picked up. And due to our workload and whatnot, and knowing who to send them to, they are included here. Is there any, Kelly or Krista, any things that you would like to comment on in the annual report, on the minutes at least? Oh, you got them there. No, that's the agenda.
That's just the agenda.
Yeah.
I don't have anything off of last year's.
No.
Specific.
Okay. We need to adopt those minutes. Did anybody have a chance to skim through them?
I'll move we adopt them as circulated.
Okay, thanks, Byron. And a seconder. Shay, thank you. All in favor? Good. We'll be out of here by 5:30. Kelly is going to give a report on nominations.
Well, I'm actually going to ask for the first call for nominations.
Okay, that's
We've got Keith is up. So if Keith's gonna rerun.
Yeah,
your name's down. Okay, so we've got ag person there. Gord Vandeland is the environment spot that's up, and Gord has let Krista know that he'll let his name stand. We need a pasture representative. Clint Christensen has let us know that he's going to step down. Doug Gillespie from the Dixon pasture said that he'll let his name stand if there isn't anybody else that wants to put their name in. The youth chair or the youth director is Jay Anderson, and he's going to let his name stand. Our First Nations director is Dale Mosquito, and Krista's been in contact with Dale, and Dale will let his name stand. And then our member at large is up, and Larry, you're going to let your name stand. Okay. So we have people for all the. Is Holly up?
Yeah, I haven't heard back from TC yet.
Yeah. So TC Energy, their new representative that they've nominated, we just haven't been able to get in contact yet. But as far as I know, they're supposed to let their name be carried forward. So I think we have spots, but if anybody's interested in, if you fit in any of these positions, and you want to put your name forward, just come to me here. We're gonna have one more coffee break before.
Yeah, we can do a quick break.
Just if you want to come up and put your name forward, just
Yeah.
have a quick break and you can come up and have a chat.
Okay.
Can we do first call for resolutions?
Yes, sorry. Larry will serve as resolutions chairman. If you have any
I
resolutions.
don't have any resolutions, but let's consider this second call for resolutions.
Okay, thanks, Larry.
Do we need some resolutions? Allison, do you want to discuss?
Sure, so there's just two minor changes to the bylaws that we needed to just adjust. So in 3.1, it just discusses our registered office location, and we used to have it in context, and we're just using my office location in East End now as our registered office. So I would just like to update that to show that it shall be at East End instead of context. That would be the only change for that. And then in 5.1, it just talks about the number of directors that we are allowed to have, and it says not, the board shall consist of not less than 5 and not more than 10 directors. And we're just at the stage that we've grown enough now that we don't want to limit to 10 anymore, and we're currently running with 11, I believe. So we'd like to update that to what you guys suggest. I'm not sure. 15 maybe?
So do you need motions for that?
Yeah, yes, we do for both those changes, yeah.
Well, I'll make a motion that we can change the head office address.
Okay. Seconder for that?
Will you need
Byron?
a special resolution for that then, because it's a change in the bylaws?
That is not a simple motion.
Yeah, I think it's.
That is, the bylaws can only be changed by resolution at an AGM.
Yeah, that's why we're doing it. That's what we're doing right here.
That would come forward in the resolutions down here a little ways as a resolution.
Okay.
Okay, so that's why I guess Allison has made us aware of the resolutions that are needed. So Keith, you want to bring?
Yes, I will make a resolution then.
Okay, we'll get together.
Okay.
And then we'll need somebody else to bring forward a resolution with Larry about changing the amount of.
That changes to the bylaws can be one resolution.
Oh, one resolution? Okay,
Could be one.
so you can combine those two things?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, the omnibus.
What about
Okay.
one thing? Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, you've only got 7 up there? Where do the other 4 come from?
Somewhere that's every 2 years, like I was done.
Oh,
last
okay,
year.
okay.
Yeah.
So some are just not up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we try and stagger them, but 2 years ago, we added several new positions, and that's why everything.
Start doing, then you don't flip everybody.
Yeah, yeah. So is there any thought, like our policy says 10, we got 11. Do you want to go to 12 or do you want to go to 11 or do you want to go to 14 or whatever? Or will you sort that out?
We can sort that out.
Good. That's one thing about these SARM guys, they know protocol. Okay.
Be in the written resolution and to take it to a certain point.
Yeah, you'll have that and then we can debate it and amend it if need be. Okay. Okay, that's the bylaws, Allison. And I think that we have you on next for financials.
Can we go back up and Kelly, I'll give a quick overview of the annual report.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna take a few, it will be quick.
Okay, no, that's good.
We did
Yeah.
one, it is here, it's printed. So this annual meeting is quite late in the year. So the information we're talking about ran from April of 21 until March of 22. So this does not include this summer's activity, it's all of last year's activities. And we just wanted to kind of go over some of the work that we did during that year. Because there's some neat stuff. It's all we tried to lay it all out in the annual report so you can read through. If you ever have questions, feel free to phone either Kelly and I too, and we can explain it more in depth. I think right from the start, we want to thank our board and all of our staff for keeping it running over the past years. We were excited to have a couple of new programs in the 21-22 year. One of them was the ACS, and Kelly's going to give you a quick overview of how we ended up at the point we are now.
Can we do that right now?
Yeah.
So there was first phase, so we applied for first phase funding, which was $100,000 to pull together the phase 2 application. So with that phase 1 money, we contracted Mike Schellenberg and Tom Harrison, and we started pulling together producer group meetings to understand from producers what resonated with them as far as approaches to carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas reduction. So that's where we came out with really the focus of the soil plant interface and understanding what that meant for carbon sequestration, what that meant for greenhouse gas reduction, and what that meant for soil health. And then as you're moving towards those types of goals, how does that affect biodiversity on the landscape? So how does that affect bug and bird and animal communities on the landscape when you're trying to push a ecosystem to just sequester carbon, right? So it's like, yeah, there might be some good things to carbon, but does that adversely affect other things? I mean, there's lots of things to keep in mind when you're messing with the landscape, right? So that's what came out of those producer discussions. We pulled together a more comprehensive proposal, and yeah, we made it. And now we're doing a five-year project with, as Mike had mentioned, over 50 researchers trying to understand different grazing approaches, different polycropping approaches, different perennial enhancement, perennial restoration approaches on the landscape throughout Saskatchewan. It's daunting some days, but hopefully the upside is worth it. If anybody's got any questions about that stuff, you can ask me now or corner me at some time or whatever.
One of our other new programs was a partnership with Neckmeat Reserve, Prairie. So we acquired funding. We operate on funding from 14 different agencies in the 21-22 year. So specifically for that project, we acquired funding through the Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk and through TC Energy. And what they're supporting is a 2-year program to create a conservation plan for the reserve, involving a lot of species monitoring, bats and vegetation and birds, and some medicinal plant collection information, and then also a couple of communication products, passing information from the elders on the reserve to the general public. And then we also said we would do a couple of planning workshops, passing plant identification and range health management to the land managers on the reserve. So that was something that was kind of new that we were working on this past year. This is something that comes up in the financials every year, so we wanted to touch on it quick here. Last year, a lot of our budget went to program development. So we got a significant amount of money to develop this Living Labs protocol. That was salary and research and that type of development. We also had funding from a couple of different agencies. We were subcontracted by the Native Plant Society to help them develop their invasive plant program in the sod area. And we were subcontracted through the foundation or the stock growers to help with the start of their term easement program. So a lot of this was sort of developing new programs and trying to figure out what's going to work on the landscape down here. So we just wanted to make a note of that. Elton will touch on it again in the financials.
Yeah, lots of times it comes up, you spent how much money and how much went to producers. And so we're aware of that. It's been twofold this year. Some of it has been specific for developing proposals and $100,000 just went to proposal writing, right? A lot of the SSGF money went to understanding the term easement piece and interviewing people. So there's really no project dollars going on. The other issue is that some of the project dollars that we put out on the landscape don't come into our bank account and go back out. We negotiate projects for the stock growers, and those projects we'll put on the ground and we'll do all the work to put them on the ground. The cash comes out of the stock grower coffers. It isn't shown in our budget, so we don't get to show it as money that we're putting out on the ground, right? So A little bit like that with the foundation as well. Doesn't get to come into ours and you get to see this big chunk of money that we're putting out on the landscape, but we're still having an effect on the landscape. It's just not, we're just not able to show it in our spreadsheet. And so it is what it is. We usually get grilled on it. And I'll try to answer the best I can why it's like that.
So we did want to touch on our agricultural, the project that we do that does end up with money in hand for the producers. One of the big ones is the grass bank. Once again, that doesn't show up on our books, but Kelly will give just a quick update on what's new with the grass bank.
Grass bank, third year drought in the grass bank. I think we're still having a positive effect by influencing grazers down there. But with the work we're doing with point counts and putting ARUs out on the grass bank and just being out on it, I mean, Sheena and Diego did the majority or did all the work down there. I got to go down there a little bit, but you can see the shift on the landscape from when we first started going in there. It was predominantly pipits, and there wasn't very many longspurs because there wasn't very much grazing allowed on the park, right? There'd only be the real thin soils and that where the longspurs were. With 3 years of drought, there's lots of longspurs out there now. And you know, that's, you know, can't really say that's a good thing or a bad thing. It is. And they're birds that need habitat too. But you really, being a part of that project, you really got to see the influence of grazing and which species are actually using those landscapes, right? You got to see, yeah, all of a sudden those birds are there. Oh, all of a sudden those birds are not there. And it's really, really shown how grazing influences abundance of birds. Still, we've seen a handful of sage grouse down there. We seen one hen and chick the one day when we were out there. And Diego and you guys, did you guys get to see some sage grouse?
I saw one.
You saw one? I haven't got the numbers out of Parks Canada. Sometimes they don't share that information with me either. But for 3 years of drought, I think that place looks pretty good with the work that I think we're having an effect on it. So I think it's a great project.
Okay. And with our funding that coming directly through Sodcap, our projects last year focused on antelope, on pronghorn crossings, on mountain sucker, which is a little fish on the south slope of the Cypress Hills, and on multi-species grassland bird management. So for the pronghorn projects that we worked on, it was the maps that Leanne was talking to. We actually have really neat maps available, and they show really strong corridors. And so what we did was we tried to find producers in those corridor areas that were willing to put the bottom wire smooth. So when she talks about wildlife friendly fencing, we focused on antelope friendly fencing. So we weren't too worried about the top wire, but we focused on the bottom wire, making it smooth and ideally at 18 inches, 16 to 18 inches. And then also small changes like the producers were willing to leave gates open in the winter. So if we get a bunch of snow, there's still passage. So if the snow is building up to the fence line, there's still areas. We looked a little bit at gate placement, at new gates, and the agreements were 10 years. So they were saying that they would maintain these fences as pronghorn friendly and allow for winter passage for 10 years. We did a couple of multi-species, largely pipit, just grazing management type projects. And then mountain sucker, which is offsite watering. We did one winter watering site where they were watering
a spot that was staying open in the winter, but then they're seeing a lot of manure buildup. And the producers were worried about aesthetics more than anything because it's a good fishery in there, and they didn't want anyone to complain or be concerned about the amount of manure that was building up in the riparian area. So they put in a winterized system in a different location and are going to winter there instead of wintering right alongside the creek. So we did a couple of neat riparian grazing projects as well, trying to protect those streams and keep the vegetation healthy for habitat. So 2 summers ago, up until now, we have focused largely on habitat management. We were about habitat, not about which species, not about species counts. 2 years ago, we started getting more involved in species monitoring as well. So we're still doing habitat on all the projects that we work on. But we also started doing the ARU units that Ian was talking about, and some bat reporting to track populations of bats. So it's just kind of something neat that we've added into the mix. And then of course, all the vegetation monitoring of litter and height and that type of thing.
Yeah, if you guys want to talk about the bat monitoring, Diego was one of the key guys doing that, and they're looking at broodering and roost over wintering habitat, trying to find where bats potentially were spending their winters. And Diego, we will be carrying that forward next year as well, I believe.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. We continue with the shed online labs from the UFS.
Yep.
That we put this year in 15 different sites, and we will continue this year with these sites.
So in 21, they found 7 different species of bats down in the southwest corner here. That was kind of neat. Some of them I didn't know anything about, so kind of interesting to get a baseline. The concern is, of course, the little brown bat and white nose syndrome. And what we really didn't know is a good population. Where are we starting with these populations? And so that's a lot of the work that's happening right now. Sorry, we're just cruising. If you have questions, please ask, or over supper, or phone us some other time if you have questions as well.
We had a little bit of transition with the Frenchman Wood River Weed Management area. We've got Sheena who's rolled into that spot. We went and had a conversation the other day with the minister, actually, a minister of agriculture, with some of the folks from the weed management areas. We had Tim Christensen from Marie and Shayler Lehman from Shayler is Wood River, yeah, it's in the part of the Marone pasture. And then we also had Lloyd Anderson, his old post, right, Jay? Waverly, yeah. Just to have a discussion about where weed management is fits in with their priorities with the Ministry of Agriculture. Because in the past, we had been doing goat grazing, we've been working on whites. There's a whole pile of places on the Frenchman River that got some leafy spurge issues. And if we take the foot off the gas, we're going to have probably some issues. Not probably, we're gonna have some issues, right? So ECCC had kind of moved, we had been delivering some projects for them, and we've got this producer local weed management group in the area, and I don't know what happened with Environment Canada, but they decided to go a different direction. And so we really lost our horsepower. So we went to Minister of Agriculture and laid some things out, and I think down the road we'll have an opportunity to come back to them with some strategies and maybe bring some focus to weed control again to southwestern Saskatchewan. We'd like to see the continued initiatives like we had been doing, you know, a 3-pronged approach with goat grazing spraying and beetles. We had looked at maybe a drone application because some of these places are either topography or there's issues getting in there to do spraying. So, we want to look at a few different things there, and we just need some people to step up to bat to get this done. So I think there's a great opportunity there. I was talking to Sheena the other day about maybe having a session where we strategic plan and lay out where the group's going to go moving forward. So yeah, I think there potentially is good things on the horizon.
So we partnered with, like Sodcap partnered with the weed management area 5, 6, 7 years ago. I can't remember when. They remain their own separate identity, and they run their own books. And what happens is then they provide funding and we share staff so that they're able to operate, and they have their own board of directors to maintain to be their own separate identity. And I think everybody is quite happy with that situation.
No rush on my part. I told you that I'd take the first load over and see where you were at.
All right. So the last thing we want to touch on, I think, was the youth. We try and do some youth activities every year. This year, Sheena created a journal, a nature journal. There's a couple of copies on the back there if you're interested. You can check them out. If you know of any teachers that might be interested in this project. We ran a contest maybe. So we sent these journals out to selected grade 6 classes throughout the Southwest. And the contest was that they would send back a picture of their favorite page completed for a chance to win a gift card. This is the goal of this. This was funded through Saskatchewan, and the goal was to just make kids think about nature and the area that they live in and what's kind of special, and just sit down and listen and feel and smell those things that we take for granted every day. So we'll be probably running that again this spring for kids to go out and get that done. So if you know of any teachers that might be interested in that, let us know. Of course, we also want to plug PCAP's youth programs, the Adopter After, and Taking Action for Prairie. So Kaylin was saying, there's lots of uptake in the Regina, Saskatchewan, Moose Jaw areas. I know that there's a teacher in East End as well that does the Adopter After. In the more urban areas, it's amazing because kids don't know necessarily where their beef is coming from. But in this areas, it's really important too, because we have kids that are being raised in a rural environment, living in an ag lifestyle, and in a lifestyle that often has negative connotations, right? They hear a lot of negative about what we do. So it's nice for them to get out and sit down on the grass and see all the positive things, so that when they're bombarded with this stuff, they have the backing to be able to say, we're doing good stuff too. Right, and it's important at that age to really know that what you're doing is important and makes an impression in the world. So those, we're always supportive of their programming. And that's it for the review of the annual report. Do you want to take a 5-minute break and let people do resolutions and nominations? Supper apparently will be here any minute. But let's.
And then we're going to do financials.
Yeah, and then we still have to do financials, and yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for us?
Questions?
Corner them. You got 5 minutes.
Lorne's getting hungry. Probably.
Yeah, I'm just unfamiliar with like.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right, so we did that, that's why I did that.
Yeah.
We skipped up, and so do I write in the minutes?
Yes.
What's the offer for nomination? For the last one?
Yeah.
By Larry Grant,
Larry Grant.
brought it up.
Yeah, he's sort of the chairperson.
And the nominations is a resolution.
Kelly. Nominations is
Bring that
open.
to you.
Oh, that,
That would be
okay.
right here. That was Larry there.
Yeah, that was, this is Kelly.
First call for board.
Yeah. And we forgot to put first call for resolutions. Right?
We didn't have anything else.
This ain't right.
Yep, right.
You did the
How do
nomination.
I do the minutes today, Kelly? Like, first call for board nominations is you.
Yeah, I got up and asked for requests.
These ones,
Yeah, first call for resolutions. We forgot to have it.
Go ahead.
Pick that up when I asked for the approval of the agenda.
Wait.
Everything's
Yeah.
restored.
Very
Okay.
good.
Just taking
Yeah, the bylaws.
two
And they're
people
working.
still on. Perfect. Yes. We're just making that
That'll be part of the resolution.
before we do it.
But Keith made a resolution. We don't have to address it. There doesn't have to be a section.